afternoon.
Welcome to the March 21st budget workshop. We're running a little bit late. We hope that everybody will get here. Thanks to all of you that are here. Today, we are going to be doing reports and questions. Is that correct, Mr. Phipps?
Yes, I would hope when we do our questions that we would make sure that they are germane to the topic at hand and not go off in a deep tangent because we want to be respectful of everybody's time under threat of either a fourth workshop, okay?
Okay, so that's enough encouragement, I expect. So everyone has the agenda in front of them. Mr. Phipps, do you have any other remarks before we go into the ask Ms. Joy Hogg to help us oversee the agenda, or
Yes.
add anything or amend?
Yeah,
I guess?
I have a few remarks, and the chair has, the vice chair is going to have a few remarks. But today's meeting is our second of three. For some reason, I thought this was it seems like we had more of these, but I guess these things sort of run together. But this is the second of three official budget workshops we've had so far during our budget process. And so I'd like to thank the other members of the Budget Committee for a successful Budget Committee meeting we had on March the 8th. Myself, Councilmember Driggs, Vice Chair Driggs, and Ms. Ajmira. Tariq Bakari was there, Lawana Mayfield, and we even had a visit from Matt Newton. Took time out of his busy schedule to come and visit us at that meeting. So that was a good meeting. We had a very robust discussion. And of course, parts of it will continue today. So as we go further through this process, it's become readily apparent, as is always the case when we undertake our budget, that it's going to be, we're going to be facing some difficult choices. So this is no different as we prepare our 2019 budget. The budget decisions that we make, of course, will address community priorities and make Charlotte an even better place for everyone to live. Again, we have a strong foundation from our budget process. Basically, we have our 15 budget principles that we adopted back in 2016, the first of which is going to be the linchpin of our discussions as we move forward, is the first principle dictates that funds for operating and capital expenditures will then be budgeted where there is the greatest community need. So that's the operative word, the greatest, or the operative phrase, the greatest community need. So as always, we will continue to emphasize the necessity for long-term financial planning, invest in high-impact projects, programs, and services that help us realize the vision for our community and work towards becoming the employer of choice. So with these three pillars, we feel confident, the Budget Committee, myself, I hope I speak for them, we feel confident that we will have a very comprehensive budget. But we did have a good budget meeting, and we discussed some things, and I'm going to ask Vice Chair Driggs to just briefly highlight what we did back on March 8th in our Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the March 8th meeting, we talked about the February 21st budget workshop, and we began planning for the March 21st workshop, which is today's. Brent Cagle gave us an overview of the Aviation Department budget, which we will hear more about at this meeting today. And Randy Harrington provided a summary of the CIP debt plan model. Some highlights of that include, and I'd just like to summarize this because it's a topic that has been discussed also, and try to catch everybody up with what we talked about in committee. He began with an overview of how debt capacity analysis is conducted annually to assess affordability and ensure debt planning is integrated with the capital investment process. He then showed us the calculation components of the debt capacity analysis, which include property tax revenue, sales tax revenue, investment income, existing expenses, and project spend timing. He went over key variables that impact debt capacity, such as revenues growing more rapidly than anticipated, project spending slower than anticipated, actual debt service costs lower than originally anticipated. The total debt capacity that he talked about was about 90 to 100 million, which is a number in the range that we've seen before, and noted again that some of this will be offset by overruns on current projects. And one of our segments today will be to talk about those project overruns and how they impact our debt capacity. reiterated the Big Ideas Community Investment Plan, which was the one that was put in place in 2013 and included 4 total bond cycles, 14, 16, 18, and 20. 2 of those are remaining, this year's and the one in 2020. And then completed the presentation by showing the path forward, which includes completing the Big Ideas CIP, refining bond amounts for 2018 and 20, and enhanced project planning and cost estimating. So I'd just like to say about that, I personally reached the level of comfort that the bond issuances proposed for this year can be serviced by the cash flows that we can expect. It's within the AAA debt rating that the city has. Will meet rating agency requirements. The key question for us, which will be discussed today, is what is the unused capacity that we have to work with in this budget cycle, and how do we decide how much of that to use and what amounts we should probably save for future needs. And I hope that after today's conversation we'll have clearer insight into that. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Any questions or comments to the Budget Committee introduction? Okay, let's try to get through this agenda so that we can address some of the issues and have the conversations that we're talking about on our capital investment plan. So we're going to start off, Ms. Joy Hall.
Thank you. Just a brief overview of the agenda that we'll cover today. We're going to start with our employer of choice that we left off with last time. We're going to pick up where we left off. This presentation also includes some updates with the FOP requests and retiree health. We also have our healthcare consultant here to talk about the retiree healthcare piece of it. Some of you were not here when that whole decision was made, and so we thought some background would help you in guiding the process. The Budget Committee has not seen the details of this presentation, but we wanted the full benefit of the council to listen to it. And then we'll move into the Community Investment Plan, where we started the discussion, and then we got into a very robust discussion about the debt capacity and the cost overruns. Mike Davis will complete that work. There is some movement on that. We have freed up some capacity, but I won't take away his thunder. We gave you back some, but we took it away also at the same time. And then what we will ask you to do is also take a look at the 2018 and the 2020 bond cycles and the projects that are listed in there, and give us some guidance on whether or not you want to keep those projects, you want to change them, what do you want to do with them? And if you can provide the city manager with some guidance on that, we will move forward with our CIP planning for the presentation of the budget in May. And then we'll move into Brent Cagle's aviation budget. He'll provide some details along with some strategic goals. And then it's a general fund update. That one does not have a presentation. Phil will just talk to where we are within our budget balancing and how we're moving forward. Okay. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sheila to pick up where she left off.
I just wanted to say this to the manager. Am I the first one getting these today? The question and answers. Is this new material for us?
Yes.
Okay, so it's new material for us, and it's got a number of the things that are follow-up. It may be helpful to actually kind of review what's in the materials, because when I was a kid, you remember they used to have these tests, and they would have these paper things you're not supposed to break in advance and read ahead. I always broke mine and read ahead. I know. I know, all for 1 point, right?
Rebel.
So I've been reading ahead, and a number of these relate to some of the things we're talking about today. I think it might be helpful to to walk through what you have in front of you today. The Budget Committee, have you seen these already? Parts of them, some of them?
We had a conversation about that. This, as it pertains to the employer of choice, this is basically the staff's framework for the decisions that have to be made. So I think what they're trying to do is instruct us today on what the issues are related to, but will not contain proposals or any specifics about where we might come out. And I think it's basically just for us to understand what you're working on.
Well,
is that a fair description?
That's correct.
Yes.
I either incorporate into the presentations or tell us where to look. I see a number of questions on the budget implications of reinstating retiree health care, the STEP program, police salaries, and I'm assuming all of those are employer of choice, so let's just incorporate that in.
Right, and those have been, Sheila will cover some of that
Okay,
already.
thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if it's possible, since it's okay for this one, I guess, but if there is another round of these for our third and final workshop, if we can get those a little bit ahead of time, so if we have comments, that will really be our last opportunity.
That would be important. Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm Sheila Simpson. I'm the Director of Human Resources for the City of Charlotte, and I'm honored to serve you. And I will be going back to the presentation that we had last month, and it has been updated. So I will start again with some of the foundational principles upon which the entire presentation is built, and then we will address those concerns that was just put into the room today as we go through that. In 1993, the City Council adopted a philosophy for human resources, and those really had two big components. One was compensation, and the other one was benefits. So the philosophy for both of those is that we will have competitive pay and moderate benefits. And then, as you go through this process, the strategy that we have been using to define that in terms of what is competitive pay, the practice has been since that time frame that we benchmark to the 50th percentile of those organizations that we benchmark. And I have a slide later on to tell you what those organizations are. But the 50th percentile is how we have been benchmarked.
Ms. Simpson, has it always been 50 percentile, or does it change? And how does 50 percentile, at some point, if you can explain how it actually works, whether or not we benchmark, but what do we hire?
Okay, the 50th percentile in terms of how it works administratively becomes on the broadband pay system. That becomes our midpoint of the market rate for jobs. So our market rate of a job is generally the midpoint of a job. And then in terms of how we actually use that in deployment, our current practice is that when we hire individuals, we attempt to hire them at a minimum of 90% of the midpoint. So the 50th percentile is our midpoint, and we hire at a minimum of 90% of the midpoint.
So the effect of that is that people come in 10% below what you benchmark to, and you put them up in 2 or 3 years. And is that for also consistent with police and fire?
Police and fires, they're on a step plan, and so their step plan, the way in which that plan is derived is we would take the broadband pay, and when City Council tells us the market adjustment to make, which is last year has been 3%, we would take the half of that amount, which is 1.5% if I use 3, and we would add that to the step of a police officer or a firefighter. So it's used as a supplement to the public safety pay plan, but it's all derived off of the broadbanding pay plan. So we have 3 pay plans in the City of Charlotte. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Mr. Driggs, and then the manager.
When you do the 50th percentile, I get the general idea, this is the midpoint. Are you talking about, for any given position, the midpoint of what cities pay or what is paid in the national or other market? Are you adjusting for local cost of living? I'm just interested to understand a little better, for any given employee, how that works.
Okay. So the process is actually multifaceted. We benchmark against other localities in this area. We also benchmark nationally for municipalities, and we also get survey information from private sector. So we have different points of entrance in terms of how we survey. For the large cities that we benchmark against, we usually use cities whose population is 400,000 to 1.6 million. So the idea there is to get many different perspectives, and then we use all of that data to set our market rates for the broadband pay plan.
And I apologize for interrupting, and Mr. Jones, please, if you'll comment, and then we'll get through your presentation. I I should let you get through it.
So thank you, Mayor, members of council. I'll do it from an employee perspective, so I really appreciate what Sheila is saying. With that said, from an employee perspective, that comes across as we're going to benchmark you and basically say it's the 50th percentile, and then we're going to pay you 10% less.
Right.
It's not the best marketing tool that's out there.
Right.
The way that we do this. So that's why it started off with the current philosophy needs to be reviewed.
Yes.
It is not a morale builder to basically say to employees what we've just said to you.
And it hasn't always been 50%, if I remember. It always has been? At the 50% of the, meaning that's median. Okay.
So this goes back to that we'll begin our comprehensive compensation review after this budget, and we'll take about 6 to 9 months, hear opinions, look at best practices, and come forward with a whole new compensation philosophy for the next budget cycle.
So just to reiterate what just hit the room, that is exactly why this slide is here. And the reason why this slide is here is to provide you all context to the governance under which we have been operating, and that governance was established in 1993. And the strategy today is for us to take direction from City Council as to how you would like for us to modify and move forward in that. And we do recommend that we have a comprehensive compensation and benefits review, and specifically compensation as we move forward. But we wanted to give you the context so that you can understand how this got there. On the benefits side, the statement in the philosophy statement was that benefits will provide a moderate level of income protection. Income protection was the design in 1993. So over time, we have increased, enhanced our benefit packages to be very competitive in the marketplace and to instill some very good best practices out there. And so you will see that those shifts have been made, but the philosophy was moderate level and income protection. So today, becoming an employer of choice is really where we're really aiming for this organization. And the pathway to the employer of choice has many facets to it, but from a human resources perspective, we look at all spectrums of human resources design: recruitment, compensation, benefits, professional development, employee engagement, and ownership of performance. So that's performance management. Today's conversation has been focused on two primary subjects: compensation and benefits. So under comprehensive benefits, we provide a portfolio of products. We provide portfolio of products under healthcare. We have retirement as a pension plan with some healthcare tied to it. We provide voluntary insurance benefits that employees may elect. We also provide those as an employer to our employees. We have a very enriched wellness program. Professional development is also there under benefits, and we offer a variety of paid leave options. So that's our benefits portfolio of products. Today we want to talk about healthcare. So this 5 years ago, we had a strategy. Well, 2014, the strategy was to move from where we were to provide more choices for our employees. And in that strategy, we desire to maintain a PPO option, a preferred provider organization option, and we have maintained a PPO option in that. In fact, in our current plans, we actually have 3 PPOs. We now provide 2 other types of plans, which are called high deductible healthcare plans. And they come with a product tied to it called a health savings account. So when you hear high deductible healthcare plans and you hear health savings accounts, sometimes people use them as being the same thing, but what they really are is a health savings account is a complement to a high deductible healthcare plan. And the City of Charlotte started offering 2 last year, 2 HSA plans, and we also have 3 traditional PPO plans. So in July of 2009, a decision was made to address a concern about health care for retirees. And at that point, the decision was made that we will maintain health care options for retirees for those who were currently employed, but for those who were hired after this date, we would no longer provide city-provided health care options. And in 2017, we actually put in a plan that was theoretically designed to go in sooner, but we couldn't get it in sooner. So that plan was, what do you do to provide for those people who do not have health care? And healthcare savings accounts is a financial vehicle for employees to use to save today for their future retirement. That is why we have that plan in place, is to help those of us, including myself, who's here today and will not have health care provided by the city, but to save today towards health care that's available in the future. This slide basically shows our current enrollment of our workforce today. This is how they selected their plans. So research indicates that employees value options in healthcare choices, and we provided more options. If you were here prior to last year, you were provided one option in a PPO. Those of us who had been here 3 years ago, we had two options, a PPO. One was called a PPO Basic, and one was called a PPO Plus. Last year, we only allowed people to enter into one of those plans, which was the PPO, not last year, but the year prior to last year, the PPO Basic. So the change that we made in 2018 was to really amp up an opportunity for our employees to decide what type of health care plan may best work for that individual. And I say it that way because when we look at all of our workforce, we have a workforce of about 7,300 to 7,500 people today. It depends on if you have more employees, you can get to 8,000. But our age ranges, we have the youngest is 18, the oldest is about 81. And so when you think about that, all of those individuals need something that's great for them and their situation. So providing more health care plan options allows our employees to be a consumer and buy a product that best fits his or her situation in their current lifestyle environment. So an 18-year-old has a different situation than someone who is 55 or 60, but we need to provide health care options for all of them. This
Phipps?
is really,
I'm sorry.
Simpson.
Mr. Phipps?
Last year, I guess we rolled out a series of optional plans, and there was considerable criticism about the way that the rollout occurred. What was briefly the basic reason for the confusion over the rollout of the announcement of these optional plans in terms of the I guess, employees' criticism of them?
Okay, so, Mr. Chair, I think it's, the best way to explain is the communication problem. I believe that the rollout began maybe as early as September?
August.
August. But what occurred was when you get to the mathematical calculation, right, that's what it boils down to. Those 5 options, really people started to use a tool to see how that impacted them, and that tool did not come out until much, much later. And then had that tool come out earlier, I think that would have helped.
We received, as you said, we received a lot of feedback around specifically one of those plans. It's a PPO plan that we have, and we call it PPOE. And this slide is really here as we looked at what other employers in this area offer and how our plans might compare to those from a premium perspective, what the premiums are. So on the left-hand side is the City of Charlotte's PPOD plan and the City of Charlotte's PPOE plan. And we chose those plans to put here because most of our workforce selected one of those two plans. 86% of our employees did. So if you look there at the employee-only rate, our rate for PPOD is $13 a week for our employees and $37 a week for the PPOE plan. And you can look and see that other employers at the same type of tiers, what their rates are across the employee-only tier. And then we have an employee children tier and an employee spouse tier. So if you look at this, PPOD is lower than the county's PPO plan. PPOD with the employee children tier is lower than the state's 80-20 plan. The difficulty in this type of analysis is that there are no plans that are apples to apples, okay? So you're looking at a premium cost to the employee. The things you don't know and the things we won't necessarily know is what are the plan designs for each one of those plans. And that's where a lot of the details come from. But our employees will look at the premium price, which is the first price point that they see. So that's why we decided to show this information to you, because this is the information that our employees will find and that you will find if you were go to research it. You would see their premium rates.
I may not have heard you correctly, so can you repeat the portion about the plan designs, that the employees know the plan designs, or was it that you can't do a comparable among plan designs? I wasn't sure, I'm not clear.
So I'll try to be a little bit more clear. One of the things that we offer in our plans and all of our plans is, again, around choice. Our employees can decide if they would like to use the CHS, Carolinas Health System network, or the Novant network. In some of these plans, they may be limited. You can only use one network. So what we can't tell you is how these other plans were designed, but we can tell you how our premium structure looks to their premium structure. So that's just one example.
Mayor?
Yes.
I'm going to take another shot at it. Okay. So basically, when we moved from last fiscal year to this fiscal year with those additional plans or those additional options, there were terms that were used previously that were basic and premium.
Right.
So think of D as basic and E as premium. So if you were in, let's say, employee family last year, and we're only talking about premiums, and you were in the premium plan, and you went to D, you would have saved money. Okay, same concept through each of these plans. There was one plan that if you stayed in its equivalent from last fiscal year to this fiscal year, that you would pay more in your premiums, and that is that City of Charlotte PPOE.
Right, so
There was an
basically-
option to go to D if you chose, which you would have been a savings, but I think the universe of the individuals who went from what would have been employee family premium to City of Charlotte PPOE this year was 150?
Yes, the delta was about 110,
So
something
to
like
keep
that.
the
110
same
people.
plan design, you had to pay more, that you
Yes.
had the year
For that
before.
one-
And most people did not understand that.
That's it,
Got it.
that's it.
Thank you.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, and there, in your presentation packet, there are 2 pages of appendix that compares different plans as close as we can get it.
Right.
It just depended on the employee's choice of where they went. They could save money, or they would end up paying a little bit more.
Yes, but the little bit more was actually like 100 and
Right,
something.
right, and that's the-
That's a lot of money.
Right, in that one plan, it did
Planning.
rise up, and I think
Yes.
that was because for, over the course of years, other plans were subsidizing that plan, and the 5-year philosophy of the city or HR was to try to equalize some of those ratios where all plans were paying an equal percentage. And because other plans were subsidizing that one, we did take a big hit in that.
All
That's
right.
exactly the math.
Mr. Driggs and then Ms. Ashmira.
I looked at the plans as a financial analyst, and I have to tell you, I had some difficulty trying to arrive at a conclusion about the comparisons because it's so contingent. One of them, you pay more money now, but you've got a higher deductible, you've got more co-pays, and how they compare depends on the assumptions you make about your likely utilization in the course of the year. So my question is, did you feel that staff were able to kind of reach a level of comfort about the choice they made, and that they, in the end, once they heard whatever explanations you offered, understood what had changed for them versus wherever they were before and based on whatever they went into? I noticed the utilization of the HSA-type plans was small.
Yes.
That's partly because those probably benefit people with higher tax rates more, since the tax deduction in the HSA is one of the key features there. But I just wonder, was it a smooth transition? What was the kind of reaction you got when you rolled it out?
We did not anticipate a high migration to HSA plans. That was not part of the strategy. The strategy was not to migrate staff to an HSA. The strategy was to start to offer the opportunity for those to look at an HSA plan. And in terms of the education level and how much people really understood about what the impact of a selection might be. From a personal perspective, so I'm going to take off my HR director hat and put on a person's hat. From a personal perspective, it was a very difficult analysis to make. And part of that reasoning is, and I'm using myself as a real person, prior years, I selected a plan based on, well, this is what I can afford a week. I wasn't thinking about how I use insurance. I didn't think too much about what if I really get sick? What is my family situation? When you buy a consumer-driven plan, it really requires you to think about that a lot. So the strategy was to offer products that our employees are very accustomed to using, which are PPO plans, and then introduce products that will require you to do a little bit more analysis about who you are as a consumer and what those key factors are in your lifestyle that may help you make that decision. So the idea was to introduce the plans in year one, and in that process, the City of Charlotte hired a benefits educator to start the process of educating our workforce around health insurance, something we've all bought for many years, but never really been formally educated in how you buy insurance. And that was introduced at the same time. So I think some of the conflict and the anxiety level came in the fact that there were multiple changes in process at the same time. And one of them was changing to introduce new plans, new types of plans. At the same time, we were, as Mr. Jones indicated, we knew that we needed to bring in a module to help people go through their personal analysis. And the module that we bought, we call it SmartBand, is a product called SmartBand. The module was implemented about 2 months after we started introducing the plans themselves. So the idea was to start the education process as soon as we could. And I will tell you from a personal perspective, it is a learning curve. It truly is a learning curve. And so our organization is committed to helping our employees learn. And last year, we actually brought in some counselors who are trained in license and insurance to meet with some employees one-on-one. And then when we could not do one-on-one meetings, we offered 4-to-1 meetings. We called them cafes. Even with all of that, when you experience using your benefits, that's when you learn how your benefits work. And the experience that most of our workforce had is with a traditional PPO. That's why we still wanted to keep one, and we still have traditional PPOs. So it's a learning curve for the organization, it's a learning curve for us as individuals, and we're going to continue to enhance that offering in terms of education because it is that important, and it's a consumer-driven model.
My specific concern is about the employee that was tempted by the low cash premium and was then
Yes.
shocked when they learned how much they ended up having to pay.
If
So
they were sick,
I hope
right.
that you cautioned people who were contemplating those low premium plans. You need to understand what this could mean for you in terms of your total. Maximum out-of-pocket doesn't really even reflect it because, again, the likelihood that you're going to pay a certain amount varies a lot according to the plan. So have you had any instances yet of people that have complained and said, wow, I just got my EOB and I can't believe how much I'm liable for?
So, Mr. Driggs, members of council, yes, we've gotten a number of complaints, a lot of complaints. In terms of the rollout, while we tried our best to adjust and readjust, I think the first time that it hit me that we were having a problem is when Chief Putney came into my office and said, "We have a problem." He said.
Where he goes, arms men follow.
So the chief was basically, I'm going to tell the story, Chief. The chief said that when it comes to, benefits, I have some of the best mathematicians on the planet in terms of law enforcement officers. So we did an admirable job trying to adjust and go out and talk and create tools, but you're exactly right. Wasn't our finest hour. It's one of the things that we're trying to do in the FY19 budget is to see that how we can make some adjustments in terms of our healthcare plan.
I would just say for employees present, I think you do actually have good options in these plans. You just need to be careful how you use them. It requires a lot more work to understand what's in them, what you could be liable for, and I appreciate the fact that we're continuing to try to maximize the benefit of health insurance. Thank you.
Yes. In terms of the total cost of healthcare in the organization, on average, the city of Charlotte spends about $106 million in healthcare. And of that, the city pays about $71 of that in terms of our total percentages there is for the city, 66% on average, and the employees pay 34% on average. So every dollar, that looks like $71 for the city of Charlotte and $35 for the employee. And that's taken an aggregate of all the options that we have on average. Wellness is a really big strategy for the city of Charlotte. And as you know, and you helped us to accomplish this, about 2 years ago, we implemented a clinic that is designed for our workforce. And there are 5 physical locations of that clinic. And it was really there to address some issues we were having around healthcare. One of them being access. We found through our employees that it was a struggle for our employees to actually get to see a physician. And the other thing that we found was that some of our employees decided not to go to a doctor. Even before we had an HSA plan, we had PPO plan. They decided not to go to a doctor because they had to pay a copay. And that copay could have been $30, it might have been $40. With the clinic, if you're in a PPO plan, you can go to the clinic, that's our clinic, and there is no copay. So it really encourages our workforce to use and get health checks and medical care that they really do need. And it has been an increasing trend of positivity on all spectrums. Utilization has been up, both for our employee and for the dependents that's on our plan that's related to our employees. So those are the people they love. And we love because they love them. And therefore, they're getting better health care because of it. Our lab cost has decreased by 33%. Emergency room visits, a big decrease there. Some of our employees didn't go to a practitioner, so they waited until they were really, really ill, and then they went to the emergency room for care, as opposed to getting treatment for something they could have been treated for prior to an emergency room visit. So the emergency room care is going down. Urgent care visits has also decreased. So across all of those spectrums and life coaching, all of those spectrums are increasing or decreasing in the right way. And so the clinic has really been a very wonderful investment for our workforce. And we hope to continue to have that utilization go up and eventually expand more, to have more clinics in the city of Charlotte or around the city of Charlotte area, and today we have 5.
Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I recall when this first initially came to the budget committee, it really came, it started off with a rocky start, but then they went back. So this has been a true success story in terms of benefits. But my question is, given the success of it, I know at one point or at some point during the discussions, it was our thought that these clinics would expand by having other, entities become involved. As the county, have they embraced the success of this plan? Are they looking at maybe joining into this network so we can have more clinics across the city, or what?
I am aware that the county has had conversations with the owners of the clinic, and the county has come over to meet with us about our experience with the clinic. So I think the answer is yes, they're having conversations. To what degree they may join, I'm not able to answer that part, but they have had conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Paid parental leave. Paid parental leave was one of the biggest changes you all helped us make last year. We implemented paid parental leave for our workforce. And I can tell you by just this data, the one is at the bottom, it's been really utilized by our workforce. So what does paid parental leave do? It allows our employees, both male and female, to take up to 6 weeks of paid leave after the birth of a child or after the adoption or placement of a child, so they can care for their new child. And it works, we've put ours in to work in conjunction with family medical leave, and in the first few months that we've put it in, 65 of our employees have really participated in this new leave, and it's a really great benefit so far. Now moving on to compensation. Another thing that you all asked us to do, to look at and evaluate, was to look at our hiring rates. And one of the things that we did was increase the minimum pay of our workforce to $15 an hour for a regular employee. And that strategy went into effect ahead of plan, and it went into effect last year, and has been really great for our workforce, because I don't know too many employers that your minimum pay is $15 an hour.
Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm glad that we did this, 2013, 14, where we implemented. But while we're having these discussions, it will be helpful to look at, based on the realities today, a comparison of the adjustment that council approved versus a living wage. Because that's a different conversation if the latest studies, the MIT living wage study and other studies that are coming out based on new development that's happening in the city says the minimum salary should be $17.12 an hour, to see if we are staying competitive under our umbrella of wanting to be an employer of choice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Braxton Winston, sorry.
I would also like to see an analysis of this quote-unquote benefits cliff, to see that if kind of in the same vein of what Ms. Mayfield was talking about, with the realities of the finances of today's workforce, is $15 an hour sufficient in terms of maintaining secure housing, maintaining childcare in a way that kind of accentuates security and employment and living?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Ms.
So
Ashmead?
can I, on page 11 in your Q&A, there is a response to some of that,
Thank you for sharing that.
and it's question number 7.
Okay, so read that, and then you may have some other things to add, or
Yeah.
look at it and see what it says, and if it gets to your point.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Ashmead?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm interested in understanding the implementation of this. So was this for all the new hires that made less than 15, and how was it implemented for the ones that's already been with us for several years that have made less than 15? So just wanting to understand, because I was recently, I had a conversation with one of our solid waste employees, and he had brought up this concern about how it was implemented. So if you could just elaborate on that?
We made this change in February of 2018,
Okay.
and the change was made if you are a regular city employee, not a temporary city employee, but if you're a regular city employee, we did an assessment of what your current pay was on that date, and we increased it to $15 an hour. So it was implemented across the board, all departments, same time, February 2018.
So, Madam Mayor, so just so to clarify, it's for new as well as the existing employees? Okay,
That's a minimum.
got it. Thank
Yes.
you.
Mr. Winston?
What would be an example of temporary employees where this was not applicable to?
A temporary employee is an employee that we hire as, on an intermittent basis, and we have approximately 200 people who are classified as temp employees. So the bulk of our workforce is a regular employee. In the layman's terms, you all might refer to that as a permanent employee. You all might use that terminology. Our terminology is a regular employee. So a temporary employee is a person who is in a position that is basically temporary for a certain period of time, and they probably don't work 40 hours a week. So,
Is there a specific job with?
oh, they're all over, they're in different jobs. There's no one classification.
That was a good one, Mr. Eggleston. I like that. I like that. You know,
That doesn't apply.
I just want to add this, and it might not be the right place, but you were talking about housing insecurity. We can pay people 15, and we have employees that we do pay this much, and they still can't get a house because they don't have a record. And the thing that bothers me the most is that sometimes it's not about the pay of the position, it's what they bring. And we've got to figure out a way that if we trust people enough to work here, they ought to be able to rent a house. And there are issues, it seems to me, that really stand in their way. And I don't know how to solve that. I don't. It's just a worry that I think about. We've got people every day coming to work, and they're doing a good job, and there are barriers to their ability to find a house. So, Mr. Winston?
Yeah, just to follow up on the mayor's point, this was actually going to be something I was going to bring up today. I was finding the right time to talk about this, but this is something that we discussed at our retreat in January. And I do want to find a solution to this, and I would love to explore as we try to be in this part of becoming an employer of choice, is to explore that option that we talked about of reaching out to creating some type of tool or program that kind of puts us as an employer of choice to people that rent homes and landlords, to say, hey, if our employees are good enough and safe enough and secure enough to employ as City of Charlotte employees, that they're good enough to live in your apartments or live in your homes.
That absolutely makes sense, and I'll go even a little bit further. The Apartment Association had a meeting, and they had this program in either Memphis or Nashville. Kim, do you remember where they were? But it was a program at Covenant Church.
Preferred employees.
And it was basically that they would accept people with reentry issues. And the manager and I met with the county about reentry, and there's an entire program and document that we need to share with you. There's a lot more going on than I was aware of, thank goodness, that's going on and it's working, but I think housing is particularly an issue. And I think that we need to begin to work with the Apartment Association to figure out how to bring the program that they've proven that works in Tennessee. I can't remember which city it was. It was Memphis, Kim? That's what yeah, Memphis, to see how it comes here. And then we're off budget topic, so I'm going to rule myself out of order, and we're going to follow up with Kim, Mr. Winston, about how we can figure this out.
Just add,
Yeah.
as the term I was looking for was a preferred employer that can secure that type of housing, but also to take it a step further and to see if in that preferred employer status, if we can deal with the affordability year over year to kind of reduce the increases in rents for our employees. I don't know if so that we can secure them in the places that they live year to year and they're not further displaced.
That might be a little bit tougher to do, but
Sure.
we can always look at it. So we'll look at that, and thank you, Ms.
Yes.
Yes, we'll keep going. Okay.
In terms of compensation, market movement trends over the years, Mr. Driggs just gets to answer the question I think you asked me earlier, and that is how do we benchmark? So on the left-hand side are groups of types of employers that we benchmark. And so we benchmark against national statistics, national municipalities, and the size ranges there 400,000 to 1.6 million. And Charlotte area municipalities as well. And then we also look at large Charlotte area private sector employers in this area, because our employees, you know, someone asked me yesterday, who is our biggest competitor? And I used two names that are private sector employers. I won't use them today, but I named two names that are private sector employers, and they were surprised that that would be the two things I would come up with first. But we do compete with private sector employers. And then the Employers Association is an organization in the city of Charlotte who actually serves as an expert in human resources and employment support for very small firms in the Charlotte area. And so we are a partner with them, and they provide us salary data as well. In 2018, you can see that for the city of Charlotte, we're on the bottom. That's the 3% that was approved by City Council last year, and we apply that to a broadbanding pay plan, and then we use that metric to set the rates for the other two pay plans, the public safety pay plan as well as the non-exempt pay plans. Compensation options to consider. One, for public safety, competitive pay, retention, and recruitment. We are aware that those are the subjects that has come to us and to City Council, and we are addressing those subjects with our workforce and with our compensation team. The general employees, the same subjects really come up, competitive rate, retention, and recruitment. Looking at options of maybe a general wage increase. Someone asked earlier about the cost of living. So we're looking at different ways to account for just general cost of living things that occur in the economy and how we might incorporate that into our wage system. Pay for performance is our merit-based system that we currently have. Retention in certain pockets of the organization continues to be an area of concern for certain types of jobs or certain type of industries. And competitive pay again. In addition to that, we are also evaluating citywide policies around incentive pay and also many policies around our leave policies and our administration practices.
Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Mayor, because I want to ask this question before we get to the police officer salary. When we're looking at retention, even though today we're talking specifically the numbers in budget, it seems like we will also have this conversation regarding employee morale. Because outside of the dollars, we've had considerable turnover in some departments. And I know one of the things the new city manager was looking at when he first came on was looking at high turnover areas. I believe that at some point we'll get a report letting us know your findings, because we've had a number of departments where if you look at a 5-year snapshot, not even going back 10 years, 5 years, and even now, high turnover, either through releasing an employee and or an employee leaving. We talked earlier regarding the opportunity for training, but that isn't always working out in each department. We have multiple HRs, so there's a conversation of consolidation of HR under one, because it's been very subjective in some departments. We have some departments where you have direct family members that work for supervisors and managers. So that has to be addressed. But while we're talking about this conversation of compensation, I don't want us to get so lost in the numbers that we're not looking at the totality of being an employer of choice, and that's also honestly the
Yes.
mental well-being
Yes.
of our employees and
Right.
the hours that are expected, as well as the caseload
Yes.
that is expected.
Yeah.
So when the time comes before we have the final conversation and we start talking about potential addition to staff, it will be helpful to really have a better idea of what is needed so that we can create an environment, because having wellness is great, but if our staff isn't using it because it means they gotta get up at 5 o'clock in the morning in order to work out or set their mind right before whatever they have to deal with during the day, we still have a disconnect somewhere while we're having this conversation, and that's gonna be a budget conversation, because if we need to add additional staff, we need to have the real numbers, because unfortunately, over the years, we've heard where departments have their proposal, but that's not necessarily the proposal that makes its way to the manager's office, nor is it the proposal that makes its way to council, whereas council has expectations of how work should be implemented on the ground, but then we find out 6 months, 8 months later that that department doesn't have enough staff, but we didn't discuss it in the budget.
So I think the manager is hearing you and should look at those areas and come back with his recommendations. Okay.
Thank you, Sheila.
Salary. In the FY19 budget that Mr. Rieger would talk about in more detail than I will, right now, we're looking at a $9.4 million salary increase to the budget, and that is making some assumptions. The biggest assumption is that we'll get a merit introduced into the budget. That's a big assumption that we're making. We built an assumption in so that
Merit is
Sorry.
down at the, in the sheet, it says merit increase.
3% merit is built into this assumption model. This is a modeling exercise, so it's built into this. And in terms of what it looks like by pay plan, the non-exempt pay plan, the impact of that would be about $1.2 million. Broadband, you went $2.1 million. And the public safety pay plan for the fire side of that, $2.7 million, and the police side of that would be $3.4 million. So these are based on some assumptions that we're making in terms of what it might look like. None of those decisions have been made yet, but we wanted to show you that number again, and then Mr. Rieger would talk to you more about that because he's doing the entire budget for you. But we put it here so you can see what it looks like from a merit perspective. Okay. Then the last time we were here, there was some conversation and some questions that really came up about police officers. And the question that pretty much hit the room was, how does our police officer pay compare to another city? And the city that we were specifically asked about was the city of Raleigh. So again, as I talked about with the benefits, sometimes it's hard to compare pay because you don't know exactly which pay you're comparing. So we broke this down to help put in perspective of when a person is looking at pay, what are they looking at? So for the city of Charlotte, our police officers are on a step plan, and the very first step of that plan, if you came in today, we will hire you at $43,492 as your annual salary. And with that, though, we also offer premium, what we call premium pay or incentive pay, and we have about 3 big buckets of that. One is if you have a 2-year degree, we're going to add 5% to that number for you having a 2-year degree. If you have a 4-year degree, then you get a 10% increase above that once you come out of recruit school. And we also provide a language incentive pay for public safety as well. That is another 5%. So 70% of our police officers have at least one incentive pay on top of their base pay. Okay. If you look on the Raleigh side of the equation, Raleigh's bottom step is at $41,068, and they have 15 steps. I think we have 13. Their top of step is $68,389. Raleigh also does education incentives. They do it differently. So they provide their education incentives in a lump sum, which is not added to your base pay, but is a lump sum, and we add it as a percent to base pay. So it's difficult to compare apples and apples when you just look at one piece of the story, but we try to aggregate it all so you can look at this. When you get to top of pay in the Charlotte system with a 4-year degree, your salary would be $74,849 with the 4-year degree. If you get on the Raleigh side, if you went to top of their step with a 4-year degree, it looks like their top salary is $69,709.
So, do you want to ask your question about police? Can we come back to your prior slide question after we do this slide?
Well, actually now I have a question about this slide as
That's what
well.
I'm saying. Can we do this slide and then go back?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I have Mr. Winston and Mr. Phipps and Mr. Newton. Thank you.
So I attended the Raleigh police officer recruitment event here in Charlotte a week or two ago, and I didn't bring the paperwork that I got from them and information I got from them downstairs, but these numbers seem a little off from what I was told and what I was shown. Also, I would also remind us that we're definitely not just competing against Raleigh. Raleigh has 800 member force. 775 of those positions are filled right now. They would sometimes go up to 825. Currently in their recruitment class, there are 3 lateral transfers in there right now. So I would say, although there's a lot of talk about Raleigh police force, that is not necessarily our greatest competitor out here, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, of police forces between here and there that we are also competing against. So as we kind of wrestle with this and digest this, it would be very short-sighted of us to just look at comparing us to
No,
Raleigh.
I think that they're going to compare based upon the comparison side. I'm sorry.
Well,
Who do you compare against?
We
Maybe
don't
that's the
use
real
this as
question.
our only comparison.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason why the slide is here is because I think the question came up about Raleigh
About
specifically.
Yeah,
So
but
that's why that's here, but when
But can
we do
you
the
tell,
work.
who do you compare with for police and fire of city? Tell us a little bit about your comparison.
So the size of
Market
cities will be
studies.
very similar to ours, the size of cities who are 400,000 to 1.6 million. And I can get you the answer to what those exact cities are. I don't know them off the top of my head, but those are the type of cities we're comparing against. And we always look locally as well. We always look locally.
So
We always look one.
Follow up, wait a minute, I think Mr. Winston has a follow-up.
my follow-up would be, this is in relation to the ability to retain our best officers and our top-line
Yes.
officers. So would it be, is it wiser to compare us to cities based on demographics, or to look at the municipalities where these officers are going regardless of their size demographics?
Yeah. We have looked at, and I don't have a slide here to show you, we've looked at why people are leaving. And the top reasons for folks leaving is not around compensation and benefits in terms of the data we have around why our police officers are leaving. So have we been told our police officers leave because of pay? Yes, we have been told that. We went back to look at the data of when the police officer left, what was the exit data around when a police officer left. And I will tell you that some of them are leaving when they're in the highest percentage of their step plan. So the chief is here, and he can talk to it better than I can, but one of the things that we do know is that to work for the federal government, some of our employees need experience to get to the federal government, and our police officers tend to get experience here, and it enables them to move on to other type jobs. The other top reason why police officers tend to leave is to take other types of employment. So they're not leaving our police department to go to another police department. They're leaving our police department to go to a different type of
Okay,
work.
Mr. Jones, and then come back.
But
Okay.
now, I would, now they might be technically going to take another job, but again, what do the benefits of those jobs offer? If you go to a federal position, your benefit package on your retirement for things like health care could be better. You go to a different, you leave the public law enforcement and go to private law enforcement, your compensation, and especially, obviously, during in the private sector, but even after upon retirement, is going to be better, possibly. So to say that it's not based on compensation, it's kind of nuanced there.
Mr. Jones.
So, Mayor, members of council, this is more of a display issue. There's no way, so to your point, Mr. Winston, that the only comparison we have is Raleigh. So even the next slide may be a display issue in that there was something that was proposed to the body about how we compare. So that is what slide 17 does. We are actively recruiting across the country for police officers. We are having actually a marketing campaign that's trying to get the best from across the country. And we're going to be successful with that. We have a lateral program that we have put into place where we're actively trying to bring folks in. So it's not just about Raleigh. So I want to make sure that we try our best
That's
to
great.
stick a pin into that one, because no way in the world is that our only competition.
Correct, yeah. Even the focus on Raleigh, you know, obviously it's part of, some of it is out of our control because of the narrative that just goes around. But I would just talk to my colleagues at least to say that it might not necessarily be wise to put too much emphasis on what Raleigh is doing as we kind of consider this moving forward.
Absolutely.
We'll take
I think we got that.
And
We'll take
Mr. Phipps, I'm sorry, did you? Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, as far as the language incentive that you stated earlier, are those for any language or priority languages that the city might want to have in their police force? I mean, if somebody spoke German or French, would they be eligible for that incentive more so than somebody that speaks Spanish?
We actually based it on, it can go to different languages. We based it on the population of our city, and as our city becomes more diverse, we may need different language capabilities out there. So we don't lock it into a certain language. Primarily, the most common language today that has an incentive is Spanish, but that's not the only language. Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes, ma'am. So just focusing on retention, not on recruitment. So I am wrapping my head around all of this and trying to understand, is there a particular step or a group of folks in steps that are more of an emphasis or a priority? So say the higher steps, is there a higher percentage there of folks that are leaving for other jobs or other, you know, employment opportunities within law enforcement, or is it, you know, what are the percentages here amongst the lower steps and the higher steps? That's my first question. Then you'd also mentioned, from the standpoint of some of the higher steps, folks are leaving for an array of different reasons, not associated with benefits, with pay. Do we know a percentage of how many of those folks are leaving for those reasons?
I can get you the specific data on that.
Why don't, I was going to say, instead of having Ms. Simpson try to guess at it, why don't we get some of that data and we can make a decision if we want to actually have a presentation by the chief at some point on what he thinks, how it's working, what's going on. That might be better, what does he hear and know within the department. So,
Sounds great.
Ms. Sabrina Hogg, I'm
So,
sorry.
it's okay.
Joy Hogg.
So just
Sorry.
want to remind
Forgive me a
the
little.
council members that we do have two public safety committees that we're working with, one of which both chiefs are at the table to talk about what would make recruitment and retention better. And we do compare it amongst many cities, it's not just Raleigh. And there are multiple factors that go into it, and we've met with them at least 4 or 5 times already to talk about what makes it better.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that as you were talking about what really makes the difference, and there are lots of choices to be made in any pay package, whether it's from salary or benefits or administrative policies. And I think we had this conversation, Mr. Bakari and I, is that most important is that the employees have some ability to give their ideas about what's most important to them as a collective. I mean, we're never going to get it's never going to be so cafeteria that you can decide between, 20 appetizers, but if there are 3 or 4 that work for the majority of the folks. So I hope that the employee groups will be active this year, and we'll come back and talk about these things. And I know you said this is for display purposes only, but I really think that these are the kinds of issues that are listed here that we need to hear from the employee work group as we go through salaries, steps, cars, shifts. All of these are really important, but knowing what's most important to the largest number of people and the work classification is really, I think, something that we ought to use as a guiding factor. So with that, I'll turn it over to the slide. I don't know what we're going to do with this.
And then I'm looking at the clock.
Oh, I'm
so-
sorry, after Mr. Newton, Mr. Driggs was on the list. Sorry, Mr. Driggs.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out in general, we have a responsibility to our employees to pay the amount that is necessary to attract the number of people we want and to keep them engaged and motivated in their work. We also have a responsibility to taxpayers not to pay any more than that. So I think a lot of our compensation conversations are about trying to find that spot. Now, in context of CMPD, I will note that if I recall correctly, the chief at one point said that applications to be police officers fell from 700 to somewhere under 300. We also have seen a situation where there were 120 departures and 116 new hires, so we weren't actually gaining any ground. I think that speaks for itself. So it's pretty clear to me, and anecdotally, it's also clear to me that there is a general mood among the officers that this whole profession is underappreciated and undercompensated. So I don't know whether these nitty-gritty if you're paying whatever you're paying compared to whomever you're comparing to, and you aren't able to attract and retain the officers that you want, then you're probably not hitting the mark. And I'm not sure what that mark is, but I just hope that we can consider that as this conversation continues. Thank you.
In the interest of time, if it's okay with you all, this slide is in your packet, and it really just addresses some of the questions that came up around, specifically came up from some of the folks in the police department, and the data is just here for you, is for presentation sakes.
Thank you.
Okay. Retiree health care has been a subject for us as well. And today we have with us Jennifer Dunn. And Jennifer Dunn is the Executive Vice President of Willis Towers Watson. And Jennifer's organization, Willis Towers Watson, has been working with the City of Charlotte for about 3 to 4 years on our benefit portfolio. And they are the local leader in health and benefits advisory for the entire region. So I'll ask Jennifer to come up because this is a lot of information, and I would like for her to walk through this subject because the subject has come up quite frequently since 2009. What is the impact of reinstating retiree health care? So I'll ask Jennifer to come forward and discuss this with us.
So this is an illustration that our actuarial team put together to help understand the implications of the cost in terms of the current cash flow, as well as the accrued liability over a period of time that has to be disclosed on the financial statements. So if we look at this illustration, in orange, everything that's in that orange is based upon the current class of eligible employees, so anybody who was here on board prior to 2009. If we look at the blue, or you might think that's purple, that is associated with opening up the retiree medical to anybody that's currently here and any future employees. So when we look at the dark orange, that is the actual cost that the retiree bears today. The retirees are picking up about 45% of the total cost on an annual basis. The light pink is the percentage or the dollars associated with the city's contribution to the annual cash flow implication. So you can see that the bar chart is showing you the cash flow implication. The dotted graph, line graph, is showing you the accrued liability over the period of time. So if we look at this today, both the cash flow and the accrued liability is pretty consistent. There's not a lot of difference between the two. Even in 2028, you start to see a difference with the expanded eligibility creating a bit of a bigger cash flow burden and also a higher accrued liability. Then as we start to approach 2030, and from there, we see that gap widening. So certainly, there's the opportunity to open up the benefit program for the current employees. It's just a matter of how you fund for that. Does anybody have any questions about that? I think the visual is pretty clear, but it's a fairly complicated process. Anyway, no?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Additional public safety pay plan compensation costs, again, in the interest of time, that information is also in your packet. What it's looking at is some of the questions that came up last time and the what-ifs, and the scenarios to look at those in terms of the what-ifs. So this is where you all come in, and the question that I'll leave with you today is really around philosophy. What type of philosophy would you like for us to adopt when you look at our current philosophy and moving forward so we can become more of a progressive employer of choice?
I have Mr. Eggleston, Mr. Bakari, Mr. Driggs, and Mr. Winston.
If you can go back to the page with all the bar charts.
This
There
one?
you go. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And maybe it's my misunderstanding what each piece means, but I think I understand the orange pieces to be our current situation if we do not reinstate retiree health care. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Then how, if we are, and we have not added anyone to the retiree health care plan since 2009?
Correct.
How does that not decrease more significantly between now and 2047 than is shown as
So
these
the orange,
employees are no longer alive?
it does begin to decrease, but you've got all those years of inflation and medical trend. So that's factored into the equation.
So it's less eligible people, but each one is costing more.
Absolutely.
So that's how it,
That's exactly right.
so it wouldn't taper off much lower until further down the road as more of those people pass away.
Exactly.
2047.
Well, 2047 is why was just surprised that it wasn't much lower at that point than it
Yeah.
is.
It will continue to diminish, but that per retiree cost continues to go up.
Less people, more
So it's-
and it takes
It's
far longer
increasing at
for
a
it to go down.
decreasing rate.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bakari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, thanks for this data, obviously very helpful. Just real quickly first, I just want to go back to what Councilman Winston was saying, but from a slightly different angle. The Charlotte to Raleigh benchmark, I get it, it's not that relevant, we discussed for those reasons, but I want to also make sure we don't leave here with the narrative that we're roughly on par with somebody, another city, that, from a pay perspective, that is not really benchmarkable to us. So they are a little more than half our population. If you add up their last 3 calendar years of homicides, they're still not even close to 2017 for us. So that's not benchmarkable. When we benchmark for the pay part, we need to look at Seattle, Denver, Indianapolis, folks that are closer to our population size. And also, just at a quick glance of the Raleigh Police Department website, it shows their topped-out senior officer salary at $77,000. So I just want to, if we, it's hard, it draws into question some of the other data points.
Correct.
If that one, I could Google.
That's a senior
fairly quickly.
officer, you're correct, that is a senior officer, we do not have that classification. The look that we had on our charts was a basic police officer. So I totally agree with you, and I share with you that it was difficult to try and do apples to apples because there really isn't an apple to an apple on that comparison, but we are attempting to address the question that hit the room, knowing that it's not an apple to apple, what if there were?
Yeah.
So they have a senior
So
officer.
I just wanted to
and we
mention
don't.
that for food for
That is
thought.
correct.
My main point is this. You asked us to talk about what is our philosophy.
Yes.
And how should we relay, and here's what I want to relay from the opinion. I don't think it's meant to be, but there's obviously an angle of our philosophy right now, which is employer of choice, right? There's a marketing angle of that, of course. But I think for us, the philosophy is an internal look of how we're going to make policy decisions.
Correct.
And then what kind of budgets we're going to adopt. And in my opinion, there's really only two drastic edges of that. You're either the employer of choice or you're the employer of last resort. Like going to college, you only got into your safety school, right? And if we're going to say employer of choice, there's so many factors beyond budget that goes into this. But if we just look at budget and what we're talking about, I think the benchmark we need to use is if one of our officers or employees came in and they had 2 offer letters from 2 different areas, they would choose us if they got ours versus not, right?
For the same pay, you're saying.
In this context, budget pay, right? But there are many other factors. I don't want to discount that. What I'd mention there is I think we need to have a policy internal kind of philosophy discussion of do we truly want to be that from a budgetary perspective? Because we can't say it and then come back and say we're okay being 10% less than 50%, right, from a benchmark perspective. So if we're going to truly be, and I would make the argument that we should be employers of choice, but I would also make the argument that we should have a philosophy, or at least consider one, that we don't look at this entire city, 8,000 plus organization as a single thing, right? Like we look at, it's not even comparable, but like we look at stormwater backlog projects, and we have to bucket them. All are important for us to solve, but we have to bucket them. What's the most dangerous? In this case, we have different buckets of employees, and I think we have to consider them in a prioritized manner. Public safety, the people putting their lives on the line, can't be benchmarked at a 50% minus 10. They can't have this comparison. I think we need to solve this problem in bite sizes that we can bite off. But we've heard directly from the officers that they would like 15% one-time salary bump. They'd like to bring it down to 7 levels. They'd like to have healthcare reinstated there. So I'd be interested in some of those numbers, especially the healthcare, to see what if we just started making the employer of choice philosophy to our public safety folks putting their lives on the line, because it's different. It's a different category than anything else. I'm not saying we don't get to everyone else and everyone's not as an important role, but we have to make a choice here. And if we want to be the employer of choice, we really have to strongly consider going over and above the average in some areas. So I would hope that the philosophy point you take away from all that is we either are an employer of choice for certain areas, all areas, or none. But if we're going to make policy decisions, let's not market it one way and then operate and make those decisions another.
I have Mr. Driggs, Mr. Winston and Mr. Driggs. I didn't write it down. Oh, yes, I did. It's Mr. Driggs and then Mr. Winston.
Thank you, Mayor. Questions like this are really economic. They're about the total cost of providing for the employee in terms of their current needs and their future needs. I know from working on a project when I was still employed elsewhere that employees, if they have the choice between higher cash compensation and, for example, pension fund contributions or retiree benefits, if they recognize that that decision impacts their current income, they want to go for the cash. It's a pretty normal thing. On the other hand, what we're also seeing today is more and more people who reach retirement age and they've got nothing. They may not yet qualify for Medicare and they don't have any kind of retirement plan. So I realize that we can't just pay the cash that we're paying and then layer on top of that these spiraling healthcare costs without putting the city and the taxpayers in an untenable position. One question I do have, though, is there any precedent for offering to employees the option to participate in a plan that would provide them future retirement and health insurance and to make contributions to that plan today the same way they do a pension plan? So could they actually buy that benefit? And can we make that option available to them at least? And that would make visible what sort of costs we're talking about. Because right now I think they tend to think in terms of, I want that insurance forever. You know, why not? We just saw the number. It's a big number, and it's a number that we can't take entirely upon ourselves. But what if we were to try and address the need by saying, okay, if this is important to you, and if you're thinking ahead about your future, then here's something we can do for you. You pay in monthly out of your paycheck, and you have an entitlement to health insurance, which we can arrange, and we can arrange it, because there are retirement health care plans. We know what the economics look like for that. So we could actually do that on a basis of some employee and possibly employer cooperation, instead of the conversation we're having now, which would put the entire burden on us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winston?
A couple, I have a few points here. Mr. Bakari, one thing I would not danger against, but just warn that, definitely I'm a child of emergency service worker, but when you kind of dig into certain jobs that occur in a municipal level, they're not always the most dangerous ones when it comes to instances of injuries on jobs and life-threatening situations. I would bet that folks in solid waste would put $1 into the ring. I would venture that folks digging into holes and fixing pipes in extreme conditions would put $1 in the ring for that as well. When you look at the statistics, while I don't disagree with the philosophy there, I would say that it's not automatically the people that we might think first and foremost that are going into undesirable situations that get the most press, I guess, in terms of the need for compensation like you speak of, which I think is actually needed. A couple other points. I would like, maybe I can take this offline, a better understanding of this broadband part of the salary increase, what that actually means. That was one of the things I wanted to go back to. But my last point was, and again, speaking to, how Mr. Bakari was speaking, this philosophy that we want to be as an employer of choice. I am a child of city workers. My father is a New York City fireman. My mother is a retired school teacher. My grandmother's a retired school teacher. We're all city workers. Nobody is in here for the money. We're in here for the service. We take on less than desirable jobs for the good of this city, of the municipalities that we exist in. And on the kind of bargain that you take, and we're mostly highly skilled in it. You don't keep these jobs if you're not good at them. But the bargain is that you're taken care of. That when you retire, you can age in place. When you retire, you can help your children out and your grandchildren out as life becomes much more difficult for them to navigate. I'm afraid, especially with the retirement packages that we're looking at, and the way that we're suggesting that we look at them strictly on a budgetary or economic base, that we're setting ourselves up for failure. We need to look at these intangibles, especially as we look at trying to be the light for this city in how we're dealing with these inequities and these systemic challenges that we have. I've spoken to Mr. Jones a couple times, and we kind of have these aha moments when we're looking at how do we get other employers to think about this like this. And we forget sometimes that we are employers ourselves, that we have up to 8,000 employees, that in order to kind of ask other people to do certain things, that we have to do them ourselves first and foremost. So if our employees can't, at the end of their service to the city, can't stay in their homes, if they are extremely burdened by healthcare, because I look further into the questions where it's being in terms of reinstating retiree healthcare, it says the recommendation is not to reinstate retiree medical insurance for active employees due to financial liability of the city. And I go down and I see that it's all about millions of dollars, which I totally understand, and we have to reckon with that. But again, the philosophy has to be, if we not just to be employers of choice, but to set the example for the private entities that exist here right now, and we want to come in to say, this is how business gets done in Charlotte. We take care of our folks so that they can live where they want to live, and they are able to be active family members in our community. So I would really hope that we go beyond just the simple numbers in the margins and take into account these intangibles that we all know that we're dealing with. Because if we don't do it, they're going to have more homeless people that are older, that can't work for themselves. We're going to have more people that are going to be working to their dying day in less than desirable situations. When it comes to us, it's going to be because they decided to serve their city. And that is not something that I can sleep at night with comfortably.
Thank you, Ms. Ashmira.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, I would like to echo what Mr. Driggs mentioned about retirement health savings plan. If we could look into that and tie that to more of an incentive pay. So for incentives pay are usually higher taxed, right, because it's a one-time payment. If employees are eligible to get incentives pay, if we could look into that and see if they could instead contribute to their retirement health savings plan, because I know a lot of private employers do that. And also some sort of rewards and performance and how that could tie to retirement health savings plan. And I think retirement health savings plan, I would say all the employees are valuable, and it should be offered to all our employees. If it's offered to one, I think it should be across the board. And also depending on how our city does in terms of our tax, so that we are not putting additional liability on our balance sheet, but more of a one-time match. Let's say if we do have, if we did better than what we had budgeted for, so I know last year we had a little bit of a positive variance. If we could look into that positive variance and could do one-time match to some sort of retirement health savings account or incentive pay, I think there could be a middle ground that we could balance addressing the retirement health savings needs, but at the same time not putting additional liability on our taxpayers and increasing our liabilities on balance sheet.
Ms. Ashmira, if I may, to provide a little information I didn't say earlier, and that is with our health savings account plans, the City of Charlotte does contribute to the health savings plan accounts at different levels depending on which tier, which selection the employee made. The minimum contribution is $500, and I think the maximum contribution we make annually is $2,000, and it is incentive-based with that. In addition to that, a health savings account, I think your question was, can we provide a health savings account to all employees? I think that's something you asked. The health savings account plans
No,
are...
I'm sorry. Health savings account, I wasn't talking about health savings account. I was talking about retirement health savings account, because I know HSA is tied to your high deductible medical plan.
Yes.
No,
Okay.
that no.
Okay, I'm
two
sorry,
separate things.
I misunderstood you, I apologize,
that's
so
fine.
thank you.
So it's good to know, I wasn't aware that we had retirement health savings plan.
Yes.
Because I was not part of the presentation, so I wasn't aware of that. So what is the maximum match that we have currently?
It's a contribution, it's not a max, it's a contribution that the city makes.
Uh-huh.
And the employee can contribute above that, up to the regulation by the IRS. If I'm not mistaken, that amount is, the maximum amount per person is $3,400?
So are you saying that we are contributing regardless of the match currently?
That is correct. We are
Okay.
contributing, if an employee decides not to contribute $1, we contribute.
Okay, well, that's a good information I wasn't aware of. So I think if we could show that here is the benefit that's not been accounted for, so people are aware that we do have some sort of retirement health savings option for those employees. Thank you.
Okay. I have Ms. Mayfield and then back to Mr. Driggs.
Well, Mayor, Mr. Driggs, was it directly in response to Ms.
It was
Ashmira?
related to what
I'm sorry, I
Councilmember
thought,
Ashmira was saying.
go ahead. Thank you.
I just want to point out that one of the important things about a retirement plan is that you're part of a group plan.
Yes.
So your eligibility for it, the cost you pay for it is all in the context of a negotiated plan for a group. If you provide funding for retirement, the employee could still be out looking for their own insurance, and at least as I understand it. So my question was, could employees buy eligibility to be in the health plan after retirement by making payments during the period of their employment? Because then
It's
they
a
would
different
get all
strategy.
of the benefits of membership in the plan and not just
Am I
have.
saying a yes to that's the correct question, or
Well,
yes to?
I'm saying, yes, that's a different type of strategy, and I think we can look at that.
That's,
Yeah,
so
I
the
mean, it's an
question,
idea.
your question is
Just a thought.
different than Ms. Ashmere.
So
It was different, I think.
I just have a question. So are you talking about more like Cobra, where, so after you depart from the organization, you are eligible to participate in the plan as long as you pay entire portion? Is that,
Cobra is a continuing benefit for 18 months after you leave any
Right.
given employment, and it keeps your continuity of insurance coverage for the purposes of any. What I'm talking about here is getting the same retirement benefit
For
that
rest,
other employees previous to 2009 got, but you pay for it. So all we do is we just cost it out, and we say, okay, you can be part of this, but the way it stands right now, we need help from you in defraying that cost. I don't think we should ignore that cost, but at the same time, we have to recognize the city cannot assume that entire burden. So the question is, can something like that be worked out?
Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is really going to be a question for the city manager and for the chief, because what we don't talk about when we talk about our police is that we have one of the best trainings in the nation. And a number of our officers, when they go through our training, we then lose them to ATF and higher forms of government. And we don't have a model in place that says, like with education, your company might offer tuition reimbursement, but you commit to stay with the company for X number of years. If not, you know you got to pay back those costs to the education. Our training is one of those that, again, is at the top. So when we're losing our officers and they're going off, and I appreciate the fact that you showed the numbers for Raleigh, because our officers came to a council meeting, and the examples that they specifically use, which staff cannot say and should say, but one of us around this dais should have said, you were giving us information based off of specific that was brought to us, and that was members saying, well, in Raleigh, XYZ. So what you showed was, in actuality, what was said wasn't necessarily a direct correlation. But we also aren't talking about that impact. I don't know if there is a way to put in place that what is the cost? What is the actual financial cost of our training? And when we lose one of those officers before a 10-year period, or what is that time period as well? Is that time period where we see the benefit of the education that we've given? Is that 10 years? Is that 15 years? Is that 4 years? If that officer leaves within that window, what have we lost, not only in training costs, but also in that individual who's now going off to the federal government on some level, becoming a Secret Service agent or others? Because we have talked to former officers that came from here, but you don't get the chance to highlight that other side of the training. So there has to be a way that we bring that into the conversation, because as we say, it's very difficult to do an apples-to-apples comparison, but also provide all the information so that when my colleagues are hearing from members and they say they want a 15% across the board, that's a great idea. I want a 15% across the board raise too. But here's the reality, we're government. And for the funding that we have, how do we identify the best? How do we retain that best? And it's not all just the money, because we're also not talking about why we're losing those individuals. So that information, I think, would be helpful if you can work with the chief and his team to bring those real realities to the table so that we can have a conversation about it.
Mr.
Thank
Jones?
you.
Absolutely. I believe that would be extremely helpful. I'd like Sheila to go back to slide 4, if you will. You bring up a great point, Councilmember Mayfield. And I think it's important that we talk about what we were trying to achieve today. And it was really 2 components of the six components that relate to this employer of choice. And we were talking about compensation and benefits. So you're exactly right. There's professional development, there's training, employee engagement, recruitment. So it's not just the money.
Right.
And so maybe in here, we need to think a bit more about some of the core areas that may include what happens after someone leaves service, retirement. But I just didn't want the council to leave today and think that it was only about compensation. We were trying to narrow it to two pieces today because there's so much to discuss.
Mr. Driggs? You've already covered your comments. Mr. Winston, Mr. Bakari.
Two things. I went upstairs and I grabbed the information from Raleigh. And I would say, I know we can't do everything apples to apples, but Mr. Bakari is right. I mean, if an officer leaves here and goes to Raleigh, again, I know I said don't necessarily just compare Raleigh, but they never go to be detective. They never try to gain rank. They can top out at $77,000 a year. And that's just fact of the matter, and that's what we have to consider. We can't just pick and choose and.
I think.
And also, if we want to, we have to put what's on the table. Our RFD lateral entry officers receive excellent starting pay commensurate with their previous work experience, up to 12 years. They also enjoy attractive benefits package that include dual retirement program and dental, health, and life insurance. So that is what we're up against. Other municipalities that are offering these things that we continue to advise ourselves against doing. Also one quick note about all the health care choices for, it was very difficult for me as a father of 3 children to figure this out. There's a lot of stuff that as I'm choosing these plans, trying to figure it out, what do I want, what do I need? You have to make decisions on what you can do, not necessarily what you want and what you need. So it would be, honestly, if I wish I could just say, I can budget this amount per month. This is what I got. What are my options? And what am I giving up? And that's about it. There was all types of different questions about what I would want, this, that, and the other. It wasn't helpful. It wasn't helpful. In the end, I thought I knew what I want. Then a week later, I'm like, you know what? Just take this amount out my check a month, and I'll figure it out as it comes. So it was, I don't know. We just have to do something better. I would really, if it was just, this is what I got, what do I get back for?
Understood, thank you.
Mr. Bakari and Mr. Bakari.
Just a specific point of feedback to consider as you go through with this to the next step. So when you look at what your current recommendation is for the budget, it includes 1.5% market adjustment, 3% merit increase. So there's 4.5% right there. So I might consider looking at maybe a hybrid, compromise between what our officers have asked for when they came to see us and see what do the impacts look like of around an additional 5% market adjustment, but not across the board, in a pool that the chief and his leadership can look around and figure out a merit-based way to also reward individually, not across the board. So it's smaller than they wanted, but perhaps it will go to the areas of most need. When you look bringing that approach down to 7 steps, it's $1 million impact to the budget. Now, over time it increases a little bit, but I think that's a relatively small ask given the fact that these folks are putting their lives on the line. And I love Councilman Driggs' idea of the retirement benefit hybrid approach where they're paying today and potentially being in a pool later on with some matching today. So if either can strongly consider that or strongly consider going back to pre-2009 for just those groups, for just those individuals. It would be a smaller amount. Is it fair to the entire world? No. But I think we need to start looking long and hard with problems like this to, where are the folks out there putting their lives on the line, taking these impacts, risking their lives? What responsibilities do we have to be their employer of choice? So I just strongly consider that. And then finally, it's easy to look at percentages and things like that. But it's important to remember, these folks, when they first come in, putting their lives on the line, make $43,000 a year. That is when you look at the finite number, not percentages or aggregate, that is an incredibly small amount of money. And I can argue just as well as anyone else that nurses and teachers and many others fall into that same bucket. But the police officers are who are in front of us right now for a decision. So I'd strongly encourage us to go back and see where we can maybe stop doing some other things and use that budget to do this. Not everything they asked for, but maybe a little more than what we're seeing here. I would really appreciate that, Mr. Manager.
Is this in response to Mr. Bakari or Mr. Phipps was next? Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I was wanting to piggyback off Mr. Braxton's comment about making the choices on what kind of plans and how do you evaluate them. Now, you've indicated that we now have, that we had some counselors that are available to talk one-on-one with employees, but is there any flexibility after you make your choice? Do you have to wait for the next open enrollment period to be able to make adjustments?
Change of life
Or can you,
circumstance.
or is there any flexibility to make corrections if you, as a result of talking to counselors, that you could make a more appropriate choice for your circumstances? Or do you have to wait for the next open enrollment period to do that?
In our current system, yes, you would wait till the next open enrollment period. What I'd have to have us think about offline is what's the impact of trying to make changes mid-year? So those plan designs go in, and there's a cost modeling that goes into all of that once you make a selection. So I don't know how deep the impact would be to offer a chance to modify your enrollment mid-year.
Okay.
And Jennifer's here, she's gonna make a comment from a benefit perspective.
You have to go to the microphone, please.
Mike.
Under the regulations that allow for employees to pay for their premiums on a pre-tax basis, they're restricted from making changes mid-year unless they have a life event. So unless they have a baby or get divorced or do something material, they're not allowed to do that. It would jeopardize the tax deductibility.
Yes.
So basically,
Going to the chapel.
you make that decision, you got 12 months you have to wait more or less to change it unless you have a life event.
Or you can
Right.
get married.
Mr. Driggs?
I just wanted to comment briefly, Mayor. The fire department has also raised issues about retirement health benefits and so on. So I just want to make it clear that they are also in our thoughts here. We've focused on the police department, I think appropriately, but there are also negotiation or conversations going on with members of our fire department. I think they're very fired up, but the key issue that I've heard about is the retirement benefits.
Okay, that pun was completely intended. And I would just like to say, we are now back, we said 60 minutes on this. And so it was 2:30, right? So we're good. So can I add?
I was slow right
No,
there.
we're a half an hour
Oh,
behind.
we're an hour?
Yes,
It is
it's 3:30 now.
God.
Yes, it's 3:30.
It's 3:30.
We're not going to get through this.
We're a half an
by
hour
4:30.
behind, Mayor.
All
the questions are germane. I mean,
Well, I
That's why-
think there's some debate about the germane issue. Really.
That's
Germaine
why
may not be here
you know,
today.
I always say,
I wanted to just say,
I can see it coming.
I wanted to say a couple of things. I think it might be good to have the lunch session on employee benefits, because I think that we often talk about one thing and we don't see the array. And there's a lot of things that we've done. So when retiree compensation changed, then the city began to make a contribution to deferred compensation. There are always offsets to a number of these things, but we only look at the minuses and not what was done for the pluses. All of that to be said, no matter what the past was, we want to be most current with initiatives that are comparable. And so I would like to say my philosophy, I think we had a few comments about what to do, and then we had some rationale for how to do it, and then we have some philosophy on it. But I would say my philosophy is that we are doing the most current and innovative competitive initiatives in compensation, whether that be in any one of those boxes. Those ought to be it. I do think the 50% market is an issue for us, to come in and say we will pay the best employees 50% and may start you at even 10 below. That just doesn't send the message
45%.
that I think. And the final thing I'm going to say about this is, we make the decision, but these issues are for those 8,000 people, and they ought to have as much input as possible, because we shouldn't sit here and kind of look at it only from our view. I think it's really important to hear from the organizations, however you choose to manage that process. I know that there are going to be people, you have to select people, but somehow we need to really reflect inside the organization the opportunity to give feedback on this, because we hear from most often the most vocal,
And to that
most
end,
organized.
Mayor, we have an employment relations committee that started to look at those things, and
I
they're
understand
across the
that.
city.
But like I said, I think we often have the most vocal and the most organized, even when the management organizes them. So somehow, if there's a random way
So my
to
council-
pull,
But us as council to get it.
no, remember, we hire one person.
Right.
I want the manager to get comments, and I want him to feel like those comments are not reflective of the most vocal or the most organized. So that's it. So I'm sorry that I thought it was, I should turn on my phone and watch. It's 3:35. So we end at 4:30, and I'm looking at this. We've got 60 minutes, 75 minutes, right, of material to cover in 60 minutes to do it in. So what's most important for us to take to the next step between the staff and the budget committee of the community investment plan, the aviation general fund update? What's most important out of that list?
Community investment plan. I think the community
CIP.
investment.
All right, so we'll do the community investment plan, and then we'll see where we are, and if we can do that in the time frame. So I'm going to say, as a general rule, we all have lots of opinions, and we can state them with examples and a lot of extra words sometimes. So if we can kind of narrow it down to the basics, that might help.
And Mayor, if I may say, I was really serious at the start of the meeting when I said that we probably will have to give some consideration to a
an
fourth
additional meeting.
workshop. I mean, unless we're gonna refer everything back to the budget committee. I
I second that.
Okay, so we're going to the capital improvement program now. Phil? I don't see Mike, but I see Phil.
Come on.
Okay, come on, let's go.
Mike Davis is going to
Refer to the
present.
committee.
Yeah, we'll handle it, right?
Yeah, that's
Manager's going to provide some opening
They all take too
comments.
much time.
So, thank you, Mayor and members of council. And Mayor, I think you know this just as, probably better than anybody. Sometimes when it's the budget season, you spend more time in the building on Saturdays and Sundays than you do during the week. So with one of our weekend sessions, we actually had our, I guess, first aha moment. And the aha moment is really the big ideas. So if you go back to, I would guess it's FY13, there was a great collaborative effort between the department heads to talk about what are some of the big ideas. And that included 4 bond cycles. So you would have 2014, 2016, 2018, and 2020. And there was a bit of a different concentration of effort with those 4 bond cycles. What we're doing now is we're taking a look at the decade before those 4 bond cycles and to see what was some of the impact, as well as we talk about these 4 bond cycles, the big idea, the community investment plan, and we're halfway through. We also believe that there have been some good outcomes because of the big idea. But as we go forward into 2022 and 2024, those bond cycles, is there a hybrid approach? Are we making sure that what we're doing throughout the city is impacting every inch of the city? So with that said, it's pretty important to lay that out, because what we also discovered during that aha moment is that there was a very different, I guess, the discipline with the big idea than with previous CIPs. And so we started to find out that maybe some of the projects were just projects that were put in, and not necessarily the engineering or the planning that went behind it. So while we do have some issues that relate to just cost escalation, there were some issues that were just related to how do you cost out a project. So won't be able to get there in the next month or so, But as we start to look into the future, we want to have that discipline that comes back to the CIP process. With that said, one of the takeaways we had last time was to talk a bit about some of those projects that were eating up capacity and to come back to you with refined numbers. With that, we also had a takeaway to take a look into 2018 also, that bond cycle, because you don't want to have another series of issues that come up a year from now. I'll tell you that we haven't gone through everything that's in 2018, but we have some issues that have popped up, but we also have solutions. So that's really the backdrop. It's a limited number of slides today, more so to give you more of an opportunity for conversation, but also staff coming back with some refined numbers related to some of the cost overruns that we had beforehand. So that's the setup.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So my name is Mike Davis. I'm Director of Engineering and Property Management. So I have 6 slides, and where I was going to begin is sort of with the punchline slide. So this is showing you an updated chart. You saw a chart that looked a lot like this at the last workshop that listed out at the time 8 projects that we anticipate would require additional funding to complete. They're now, there's a new total shown in the sort of right-hand margin. If you see the updated estimated funds needed and the total to the bottom, what you saw before was $47.8 million of additional funds put into those projects. That number has been brought down to 32.65. What is shown in green in this table is basically where there's been movement from what you saw in the last chart. What I wanted to do with the slides that follow this one is, for one, tell you that there are a couple line items in here where the numbers don't move a whole lot. That has to do with going back and scrubbing budgets, looking at things like contingencies, for example, and finding just reductions in what we think may be anticipated as needs. But there are 2 big things that move that I want to give you some detail on. One is the Joint Communications Center, and the other is the police station programs, which is based on a bid opening we just had last Tuesday. So we can come back to that at any moment. The next couple slides deal directly with Joint Communications Center. So this content was in your packet last time. It's been updated. What we represented, what we knew in the last workshop was that if you took the project as it had been designed, put it out to bid, which we had done, and then try to determine from that how much additional funding you would need to complete the project, you would need around $20 million. What we have done since then is the work necessary to figure out what is the path to deliver a project that delivers the core function of that facility in the budget. And to sort of try to make sense of this, I want to tell you where we've been and where we think is the path forward on this. So there's a lot more history to this than I can possibly explain, but to do it in a couple slides, what I want to tell you is at one moment in time, there was a concept that some people may regard as sort of a suburban model of a building sort of surrounded by surface parking. And we went through a major design change in terms of how this building was sited on the property back in 2014. And the intended benefit of that was to try to do this project in a way that would better engage Statesville Avenue, provide sort of an indication of how we'd like to see that corridor develop over time. But with that, it did come with, this is what that concept now would look like. And so you see in blue that that facility moved closer to Statesville Avenue. When you do that, it did bring some new costs to the project. And so just at a high level, what those included were something we'll call building hardening. And that is basically just, this is a public safety facility. And so when you bring it closer to the road, it brought with it some structural requirements to make that building more resistant to threats. And so that was a big driver of cost. Construction cost escalation has been a factor here, but it is tied to that hardening concept. We found out what it really means to deal with construction cost escalation when you're trying to build a building to resist certain kinds of threats when you're up close to Statesville Avenue or any other street. And then lastly, there were other site improvements that came along with that move, including grading and some new street requirements. So as we opened those bids and found out sort of what we were up against in terms of cost escalation on this project, this now represents what we think is the right path forward to deliver the project on budget. The first would be is that you relocate the building to a distance from Statesville Avenue that eliminates the need for structural hardening. There is some physics and science behind that. There are distances over which you can finally get enough separation that you don't have to resist shock waves from explosions and things like that. The other would be that you reduce the size of the building to accommodate the core functions originally intended, including police and fire 911. And so I wanted to show that to you in a massing diagram, is what's shown in red. So that would be the location of that new facility separated further from Statesville Avenue. That's the new JCC building location. And what's represented in blue would be what you can think of as potential future building pads, not for any specific purpose that we would intend at this point. That was always sort of intended as, particularly on the Graham Street edge, as something that could be sold off for future use or for city later on. And then as part of that design process, over the next 3 to 4 months as we'd work through refining that design, we think we would have better cost certainty on whether or not 311 could be a component that's included in that, the building that's shown in red. So that's what I have on Joint Communication Center. Again, there's a lot more information behind it. I can keep moving.
We have some questions. We'll take the questions on joint communications. I've got Councilmember Mayfield and then Bakari.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Davis, 2 questions. One, why do we identify relocating the building closer to Statesville versus closer to Graham?
So I wasn't around when that decision was made. I know the interest was to try to bring it closer to the street. I do not know, I don't have that history, I'm sorry. We can follow up on that unless someone here knows that history.
So a lot has changed from when we first started this conversation and it being a much smaller joint communication center, then we became very aspirational in it. It would be helpful because I would have a concern with stating that the location closer to Graham as a potential future building pad to be sold off. I'm trying to understand the logic of why we have land that we would attempt to sell off to either another entity, private entity, opposed to utilizing that space where we might not need to do the grading that we're talking about doing for Statesville.
So I did just get a helpful whisper in my ear that a driver on selecting the Statesville Avenue side had to do with utility relocation costs.
So the utility relocation costs is why, again, I'm gonna ask the same second part of my question. If utility relocation costs would be a challenge with taking it to Graham, why would we have that strip on Graham that potentially can be sold to someone else?
Sure. I mean, at some point that becomes, when we're making a decision about where a site would go, it makes sense to me that utility relocation would help drive that cost. That still is going to leave some residual value for that site. Clearly, that becomes a cost, whether borne by us or deducted in a future sale later. We'll have to see if that is something that has value in the market at the right time.
So last month, we received the first part of this presentation regarding the Joint Community Center. So now we're getting a little bit more detail on it. It will be helpful to know exactly what utility relocation costs what utilities need to be relocated that would create that much of a challenge from it being on one end versus another. And again, why would we be selling off a piece of land on the front of it? Potentially.
So, Mayor, members of council.
Did someone say selling something? Where did that
No,
come
that's what was just mentioned.
It is a potential for a future building pad.
And what was just said.
Which could be 311. I confirmed to make sure I didn't miss a meeting.
Yeah, I was
There
trying to
isn't
figure
a
that out.
conversation going on, Mike, that I know of about selling.
There's no intention at this point to sell. I probably got ahead of that.
That was what was said.
Okay,
So
Forgive
therefore,
me.
clarification.
No, that's why I was asking, because you said it, and I'm like, what?
Forgive me.
Okay.
That pad, it's merely representative of
So
a building that could be
it's a
built
site.
there at some
It's a
point.
site that
It has no
someone-
plan at this
Okay,
point
but no-
for sale
no-
or for construction by
Okay.
city use.
All right, all right, so we're good on that question. So Ms. Mayfield, would your, So they've estimated, and I think what you're saying is the differential for utility relocation is best on the Statesville side. So.
In
we're gonna-
so back to
and-
my question was the comparison of why Statesville versus Graham, and that's, you're saying it's because of utility relocation costs. It was more economical for it to go towards Statesville
Yes, ma'am.
and leave the front pad of Graham out for some potential development later on.
Yes, ma'am.
No. All right, Mr. Bakari is next. One minute.
Yeah, just more of a strategic level question. With all the changes that have occurred in technology, in people partnering with this in the years since it first came to be a decision, and then when you look at all of other priorities, crumbling infrastructure, needs, things of that nature, 10-year stormwater backlogs, why is the Joint Communications Center and $86 million still a top priority?
So I can only answer a part of that. I've learned a lot about Joint Communications Center as I've come to understand this and other projects. What I know to be true is that the existing 911 facilities that we have currently are in need of investment. So clearly, 911 is needed in a community, and whether it's accommodated in this facility or in a different manner, that investment needs to be made. To go much deeper into that in terms of how this was prioritized against other needs at the time this project was commissioned, I don't know. Could probably bring you some of that thinking in a follow-up.
I'd like to see some of that, and I'd also like to challenge you, Mr. Manager, to go back and not just look at the, the changes that occurred and required hardening, but just what's changed. I mean, does 911 infrastructure, which obviously important if that is indeed the case and needs to happen, does it need a whole compound and a building built? Or are there other things that could cost less? Because we've got to look at every single dollar we're spending right now. There are so many needs.
Mr. Jones?
So I'd like to address that, Mayor, members of council. Boy, where do you start with this?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go with facts and not what may be the legend behind this building. The facts are this really didn't start off as a programming concept, all right? So you would think, if we talked about a discipline behind the CIP, it would be, let's start off by first saying we need a need, right? And then you start off with the need. And then if you're really going to have a joint, this JCC, why would you have a police 911 and a fire 911, right? Are there some opportunities for consolidation even there? It didn't start with what I would call the correct way to begin a discussion. So we're here, right? And if the question from this council is, how does this rank in the needs? That's a very different question that I would like to entertain, because I know there's a cost associated with the acquisition of the land, and that if we don't build on this, there may be something that we'd have to pay back, if I have that correct. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't entertain that conversation, and I would love to be able to entertain that conversation.
I would strongly, Mayor, if I may follow up, encourage my colleagues to encourage our city manager to entertain that thought and bring us back what that might look like.
I would agree. If there is any question, before we put an investment like this in place, we ought to look at every option. Things do change. Circumstances have changed. We all know that Medic was going to be here. Medic's got out off of Billy
Wilkinson.
Graham. Is it Billy Graham?
Wilkinson.
Wilkinson. When you look at these projects, and even, I remember the last time we looked at this, it was like, well, we have to harden the building because it's going to be the place that if there is any kind of threat, catastrophe, or whatever, this is going to be the place that would remain standing. Well, I'm not so sure that remaining standing, what that even means today, and the changes that have occurred. So I don't know. I'm going to say it this way. Unless anyone objects, Mr. Jones, we'd like for you to come back and tell us what's the best way to proceed to have the 911 operate effectively, efficiently for this growing community in light of how we manage communications within our own organization, as well as any other partnerships that would like to be in place. Because I think that we've gone so far into this, it's very difficult for us to see the forest anymore.
Agreed.
We're looking at a tree. So, no objections? Then we would like to see that.
Thank you.
Mr. Driggs, and then Mr. Winston, and then Mr. Driggs.
Very briefly, it was 70-something
I'm sorry, I said
million.
Mr. Winston first, and then Mr.
Okay,
Driggs.
go ahead.
I just have one comment. It might not be relevant after this next action, but just the idea of there's a lot of development going on over there, especially around Camp North End, and there's going to be significant impact. Would love to see, if we go forward in this path, attention paid to how this building and our employees who work there can kind of interconnect with the development that's happening there, whether it be places to eat, places to recreate, even places to live, that makes sense between that whole area. We don't want to silo ourselves away from what's happening over there.
Okay, Mr. Driggs?
I think further your comments, Mayor, this started out somewhere in the 70s. It was supposed to include Medic. Now we're struggling to get it done without Medic. They spent $50 million to put Medic at a different location. We have spent millions on this, and so a lot of that is not coming back, right? So I just hope we could get this right this time. I'd like to hear both of the chiefs talk to us about why they think this is a better use of money than other things they might do with that large a sum. I mean, that would be a good bench post for me, just in terms of their needs to be effective in their jobs. Thank you.
Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, and I know that it was a plan to bring 311 Center into this particular complex. But does that mean that that somehow our contract with the office park that we're in currently with 311, has that been affected? Are they expected to move now as a result of this project? As we get rid of it, do we have to try to find a new location for them now?
So, Mr. Phipps, to your question, I did talk with our Director of Housing and Neighborhood Services, and right now, conceptually, we do pay rent there, but there isn't a desire or immediate desire to have to move out of that space. So there is a trade-off, and that's where that blue box represented was. So let's take a big step back. It wasn't just Medic, it was the sheriff, it was so many different entities in here, and there wasn't a conversation with the folks involved, right? So we started off with this grand plan without really getting sign-off, right? So as we move forward, that's a 4-story building, which included an opportunity for the EOC, an opportunity for 311, and I believe the other 2 floors were related to 911, with some smidgens of spaces for other entities. If we go back and just look at the police and fire, and if those are 2 floors and we're looking at 40,000 feet, it's a very different discussion. And if there is capacity, if we stay down this path, and remember, the 2 chiefs that were involved in this discussion are no longer the chiefs.
Right.
Okay? But if we go down the path that this is for whatever reason, if it's because of the investment that we put into the property, we're going to be able to come in way under $86 million.
And you have a vacant floor.
Right.
In an existing building on the site.
So,
It just,
so again, it was almost trying to solve a problem that was no longer a problem.
right.
Right. So a new view of this, which starts off with 911, which I can tell you that Putney's smart, he left. Is that's all he's really been thinking about.
Right.
911 fire, 911 police, but
We will,
yeah, okay.
Ms. Mayfield, last moment on this, and then we'll go on, because this has been years. And it's not, I'm grateful for the opportunity for a new look, especially around that amount of money. Ms. Mayfield?
I appreciate the city manager acknowledging that the reality is we started down a path, but we have to be mature enough to recognize we made a mistake. Yes, we spent money into it, but that doesn't mean throw more money into it to try to make a wrong a right. So we need to really rethink this whole process. It was a joint communication system. Our joint partner decided to go in a different direction, so that changed the whole conversation. But unfortunately, what it means is now we're, as my colleague and I was saying to each other, he said it correctly, we're now left holding the bag. But that doesn't mean we just continue down this path and just add more to it. So I'm glad that you're hearing that there's a change in direction from your council.
Okay, so thank you. We're now going to move to your next challenge, police stations cost per square foot.
So, since the time of our last meeting, we opened a new bid for a new police station. And it's always helpful for us because it gives us new data. It tells us what's going on in the market for the price of the things we build. And so I just want to share it with you in the same way we see that data. To start with, just to kind of help you see it, these are the last 5 police stations that we built. Kind of right around $300 per square foot, with the last one being the Westover station, built around 3 years ago. And if what we're accustomed to over a long period of time is, like a 3% cost escalation. You all have heard me speak to you a couple times now about what we're experiencing being significantly more than that due to a thriving economy. And so we've been talking about that in the realm of 8 to 10%. And you can see where that line would take off from a few years ago and where that might have us believe prices would come in. We just opened that bid, and what it showed us was, it gave us a new data point that's considerably higher than even we'd projected at the 8%. It's really tracking at a 16% annual cost for basically the same building. We're basically building the same police station we had before in a new site. And so it's useful data to us in that way, but it's also concerning about what that means to build stations to come. So what we're trying to brace for is, as we go forward, is it a 10% off of that projection? The reality is, we learn as we go. It's sort of a cone of uncertainty, but it is a little bit of a new reality for us that shapes how we think about the remaining police stations that we'll need to build. One other way to think about that is, over that 3-year time, that 16% annual increase, that's giving us a price per square foot that's 60% more for the same police station than the same thing 3 years ago. That is just a construction reality. And so what that then is taking us to is, as we think about the police stations that have been initiated so far, and it rolls back up to the table I showed you at the beginning, is the 6.3 million. Sorry, just to kind of take you back to that table. Gives you the 6.3 at the bottom there that helps total to the 32 down below. So with any of these, we can bring you back more information if you like, but those were kind of the big things that moved in the numbers since we talked to you last.
I would like to, let's see, where are we on police stations?
600.
And that was my last slide. I was just going to take us here.
No, can you go back
Sure.
to police stations?
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask a question about current design. And have you gone back to check in on how the designs are working, the entrances, there's a lot to be said. Some of the stations have large community rooms. Some are adjacent to places where there are other public large community room spaces. And so I don't know how we're doing that, but I also don't know about how we're dealing with parking. I think surface parking is the least expensive. I don't know what we're doing in terms of parking. And then the utilization. I think, have you guys gone back and taken a look at utilization as it fits current design?
So I can tell you that, and I won't speak for the police chief, but we did have a conversation yesterday in thinking about these stations that are coming up and thinking about what has and hasn't worked for the stations that have been built.
Right.
And mainly what I'm hearing is that the way that we've been laying these sites out has been good through the feedback that I got. To your specific question about surface parking utilization, I don't know the answer to that, but we can look and see what that's been like.
I'd like to also look at where we're building community spaces, if there are availability of community spaces, if you're close to the library, if you're close to schools may not be a good example because they may not allow after school time, but just some just some thinking through for each site, what's available, and where it's located, to make sure that we have the most best use and for the square footage that we have. I also, we've been talking about domestic violence, and in the north, having a magistrate's station up in the north, and I don't know, when you get to some of these other things, how important is it to have those kinds of facilities out at the university or out in south? You know, because we are 300 square miles, is that right? Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. 300 square miles, and when the magistrates are all downtown and certain cases have to be processed that way, shouldn't we be thinking about magistrate spaces? So again, what has changed and what's different, and what can we learn about increasing the effectiveness of policing and community policing and making the buildings work for that? So I don't know the answer, but if you could look, particularly with magistrates, my understanding is the televising of people who have been arrested and the ability to make a complaint and have a magistrate located, and I know that we're not in charge of magistrates, but if we're not going to make a dent in processing more quickly, we ought to at least ask, what is the real purpose here of what we can do to make that system work better? Now, that may cost you a little bit of money, but you only get it one time. Mr. Winston?
Well, I would to piggyback on the mayor's point, as something I think about from living in other cities. It seems like being that we're so spread out, everything comes back to essentially this, again, a kind of a hub and spoke system of policing. That maybe we can reduce costs overall in our police budget if you're able to handle, for instance, simple arrest processing in the location where they occur. And you can create court dates and start the process there, as opposed to bringing an officer or two off the street, transport all the way down, right, to go back up. We just have to think about it differently.
And again, I go back to the magistrate and domestic violence and how we handle. We ought to be looking at these as facilities for community policing and criminal justice first and foremost. So I don't know whether that's all there, but the examples that Mr. Winston used, the examples that I'm thinking of, I think we ought to look at.
So just to follow up as well, just the impact on people that have to interact. For instance, people that get arrested, and that get arrested in the northernmost parts of this city, and then they end up here in the middle of Charlotte, and they go through the process and they're put out on the street, and they have to find a way to get back home. This just kind of relates to all of the other infrastructure issues that where can we improve? Can we have, again, be the example of how we can do it better for the rest of the rest of our city?
Dr. Harlow?
Thank you. So just to the police station thing again, and I know we spoke about this before, and I'm just making sure I'm reading this table right, because we know that the original CIP planned for 6 police stations. I see the bullet point, 6 police station will require additional funding now, so I'm just making the assumption that the Northwest Police Station is no longer even on the table because of these overruns now?
No, I wouldn't suggest that at all. What we brought to you was a list of things that were far enough into a design process where it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense to go backwards. You would need to put additional dollars in to complete a process. In this case, what we have is a program that was intended as 6 stations. And so what I told you before was we thought the funding we had got us through 5, and we would need to put in additional dollars to as a new investment for a 6th station, for which there's been no property purchase, that the location is still a question. What makes it a little bit different than the ones that were on the list in that we're beginning design, real estate acquisition, and need dollars to complete. So maybe that's splitting hairs, but it's just a difference in what is begun and needs dollars versus what would need new dollars to fund.
So basically, the overruns mean that right now, there's
without new dollars, you would not be able to begin a 6th station. That is true.
Got it. Okay.
Dr. Harlow, Mayor, I want to make sure that we're answering that directly. So I believe right now, based on today's dollars, we would need 4 million more. How much would you need to do Station 6?
$14.1 million.
Total.
14.
I was
You would
about to
need-
say, we're definitely going to reevaluate the JCC, so just putting that in your head and ear. Sabrina knows that's a priority for me, but yeah, so.
I think that what you're saying is that if the stations end up costing 14 million, if you average all of this out, we're going to have to look at that in the next cycle. It wouldn't drop off the list. It would be 2020, and how long could that work? Stations are going to be built as population grows, and we're going to do this work as much as we can every 2 years. But, as you say, you've got to get all of these, and it's a line. Okay, Mr. Driggs.
So, you've got about 16 to 17 million in shortfalls on that list, and you're a station short, which means that you're something like $30 million off target from where we thought we were.
It nets to about 20.
20 million.
So it's roughly,
Missing a station as well. Before, we thought we were going to get
Yes.
6 stations for a certain amount. Now we've dropped one of them. This is about 20 million
the
short.
the rough numbers would be 6 to complete the, 6 million needed to complete 5, and then roughly another 14, based on what we know today, for a site that hasn't been picked yet to
But
build.
how do
another
you get
station.
6 million from those the overruns that are listed on this chart?
So
It's like
this
16.
is a little tricky. This, police stations were set up as a program funding 60 point something, less than 61 million at the beginning to fund 6 stations. Savings and overruns from one project moved down. There's an additional 9.5 million, I want to say it is, that was anticipated funding for the program that doesn't show up on that chart. That's money that comes in that offsets. If you're trying to add those numbers up, that's why it doesn't add up. Does that make sense?
Actually, no.
I can show you a more, I can show you a more detailed.
It's not a total list. It's not a total list. It doesn't have every source of revenue. It shows you the overruns without the revenue. It just
We
shows you
can
the
talk about it
funding.
offline. I'll just point out that we seem to be way off target on our police stations, so I'm just hoping that in future, we can plan them on a shorter horizon and with greater predictability. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Winston.
I'm trying to square, actually, this conversation with the conversation we had with the Human Resources about an hour ago. I understand the need for more police coverage with growing population, but we can't keep police officers. We can't recruit enough police officers. We had a 200-person, who are we gonna put into these?
That's a 10%.
Who we gonna put into
vacancy
these
rate.
states? Who we gonna put in? As we try to expand our existing employment base in this department, we're not able to do that right now. So if we're going to put 5 or 6 more police departments full of, isn't this kind of putting the cart before the horse? In a way, to spend all this money on stuff when we can't
Let's
spend
get
money
the
on the
police
people?
chief to lay out what his hiring expectations long-term, if we continue on this path, and growth and how he would disperse. It's kind of going from the hub and spoke system, as you say. But I think that this is at the same time, a 10% vacancy rate is probably fairly consistent now. And if you're going to hire, you're still going to be 10% vacancy, even as the numbers go up.
All we
What am I
hear
doing?
over and over again from police is that it's harder and harder to keep that gap, and that it's
Okay.
increasing, and it's going to increase in the coming years as we have this wave of retirements that are coming.
Okay.
That's,
We'll find
I
that out.
feel like we already know
We'll get the numbers
that.
and see. Let's let the manager get the numbers and see what we are, retirements, vacancy rate, need for where the folks are going to be. Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, just one quick point. Just holistically, we just looked at 10 over-budget capital projects and then 6 specifically over-budget, 5 or 6 over-budget police stations. Love what we all did to give you a little leeway to go look at JCC. I'm wondering, this is a snapshot of a broader view of capital projects and things that are planned, maybe not over budget or not brought to us as over budget yet. I'm wondering if you might also look around at the broader pie and find anything that you see as doesn't make sense, things have changed, to maybe bring that back to us as well.
So, Mayor, members of council, I appreciate that. That's how I tried to set this up at the beginning. The 4 bond cycles that were part of the big idea
Right.
were very different than how the CIP was managed in the past. So some are in here having the ability to appreciate what the big ideas are supposed to do, but also start to plan to make sure that we have capacity to do things throughout the entire city are extremely important.
That totally made sense when you said it. I guess maybe when I assumed under that mandate, you were looking at things like the JCC to see if they were even relevant anymore. So I'm just mentioning it again, just in case you didn't feel that not just looking at the overruns made sense, but if the projects make sense anymore. Just want to make sure I am supportive of you looking at things like that.
Okay. All right, let's go.
So I think for this last slide, I was going to invite Randy Harrington up.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Randy Harrington, the Chief Financial Officer. And just to round out this presentation, so you heard from Mike just a little bit earlier in terms of what the total anticipated cost escalations are. And again, earlier you recall our total capacity, about 90 to 100 million. If you subtract that 32.7 million of cost escalations, we end up with roughly 57.3 to 67.3 million of available capacity that council can either choose to, as we go through the process and depending on what the manager recommends, to use all, use some, or use none and save it for later use. So I think that wraps up this presentation, and turn it back to you, Mayor.
I have a question.
Ms. Ashmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So going back to the debt capacity slide, I guess, does that include the modified figures that was presented from capital community investment plan?
You said that the modified, or
Yeah, so this modified debt capacity, does that include the modified numbers that were presented in community investment plan? Okay. So that's why it's freed up more capacity here. Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Driggs?
Just want to point out about this, the choices we have to make involve looking at our total CIP list of all the projects, which we have, and thinking about how much of this to deploy this year, how much to carry forward. The fact is that as you go out past 2020, we have relatively small increments of additional debt capacity. We're not going to be able to continue issuing bonds of $200 million per year. So there's a balance we have to strike. And I hope the staff will guide us in terms of choices that we have or the implications of decisions we make.
All right.
For example, the housing trust fund money, if we increase it, that takes away from that. I know that's on your mind. And that's just one item we know about.
Okay, thank you. We are, let's see, is the next slide, Randy?
Community investment.
so this one, so we turn it back for any other further discussion.
I think comments on anything that we've said to the manager. Please take a hard look at things that we've been doing, focus them tightly, make good connections between use and costs, and focus on where we are and come back with any recommendations and suggestions. And then I would assume that these, the housing, neighborhoods, and transportation are continuing to be our highest priorities as reflected in our focus area plans, and that we know that we have the issue of how much debt we do now as opposed to what we plan for the future and how it goes. And these are going to be very hard choices and very much needed thoughts and designs. So, but I wondered if anyone else had any other comments to provide to the manager before we move to aviation. Yes. Mr. Winston and Ms. Ashmira.
I would like us to take a closer look at this dichotomy between city and state-maintained roads, and find areas where we can negotiate with the state to say, hey, where can we kind of take the lead on infrastructure improvements, even on state-maintained roads here in Charlotte, because it's something that we run into literally every week. And I've recently learned that the answer that I've been giving many of my constituents is that we don't have any influence, we can't do anything, is simply not true. That there are potentially opportunities to at least negotiate or try to negotiate areas where we can take a lead.
Do you have an example of kind of what you were, an example of what you would like to, what kind of lead do you want us to take?
Well, one of the first things that comes up was one of the first controversial rezonings that that this new council was able to weigh in on was Providence Road and 51.
That was a good, so you would like to see us take responsibility for Providence Road, or we already own 51?
Well,
Another example.
That's not.
that's a state road.
Didn't Matthews Pineville Road?
This is Pineville Matthews and Providence Road are both state roads.
No, didn't we, wait a minute, Danny, I'm sure, didn't we trade off one time Providence, Pineville? Didn't we expand Pineville Matthews? I can't,
was
my
that
memory
Ray?
is really going bad if this is.
Or was that Ray Road?
We do from time to time negotiate with the state a transfer of responsibility among streets and roads through the city. We just did quite a few up in the University City area, the University Research Park. So we routinely do that.
Monday, sorry.
And to Councilmember Winston's point, the state does have slightly different priorities than the city does. So we have local, more urban prerogatives that we pursue. The state has more of a statewide view. But having said that, we have a really great working relationship with the state. And in just about every case, we can negotiate some sort of a good middle ground between the city's values and how we operate a transportation system and the state's values. And we do, under contract with the state, for example, run all the traffic signal systems and do installation of traffic signals both on the state system and the city system. Now, the state does need to give us permission to install new signals, but we do have a process that we go through that is usually done in pretty short order with the state, and we can get, I'd say, 90% of the topics that we talk about resolved in our favor.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Mayfield, did you have one, Mr. Phipps?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, out of those groups, my focus would be on housing and the transportation and infrastructure. I think that would, the neighborhoods would be an offshoot.
Part of that.
Yeah, I mean, when you got housing in neighborhoods, I wonder if that's sort of duplicitous to me. I think that we could get some maximum coverage with those number of.
I thought neighborhoods included sidewalks and.
Yeah.
And.
So that's
That's transportation.
And trees and things like that. Okay. Ms. Mayfield.
So we're getting ready to go to aviation, but I have a question regarding our community investment plan as we look at the breakdown. We still have projected out under our housing, basically now, thank you, housing diversity, but we have going out to 2020, still that 15 million. When will we get the report out on the bond capacity? Since we are going to be putting the package on the ballot this year for the community for our upcoming bond. Right now, we know 15 has been asked. We know some members in the community and some members on council have put out a number as high as 50 million. When are we going to get the number actually back from staff of what is our bond capacity for the trust fund dollars?
So if we go back one slide, Mayor, if that's fine?
Yes, go
If we
ahead.
go back one slide. So Councilmember Mayfield, what we have is a CIP that's pretty set.
Right.
And so, much like last year, we have capacity that's, I'm going to do some rounding, almost up to $67 million. So to change the plan right now, the opportunity would be, do you use some of that capacity to change anything that's in FY 2018 or even FY 2020? But we had an additional assignment today, and that was to go back even further and to look at the JCC and see some other projects to see what would happen with capacity. The one thing that I will say, and Councilmember Driggs said it earlier, is that there's limited capacity outside of 2020. So some of the decisions that are made based on the $67 million has a significant impact on what happens post-2020. So to answer your question, what we have right now, if today was the day that the budget would be, if tomorrow's budget was presented, 67 million would be the additional capacity, but it comes with some long-term constraints, how you utilize that.
So the reason I asked for clarification on the numbers, this includes everything that we talked about today. What I was asking specifically, because we have simultaneous conversations regarding the collective of everything that we need to do, and then we try to break out specifics. What I would like to know, so that we're having as much transparency as possible, 67 isn't what I'm gonna tell the community that we might have the capacity for just for housing. That right there is the number with everything we discussed. What I'm trying to get to is what is a realistic number that we have? Is it still 15 million? Do we realistically think we'll be able to come to the community for a bond referendum for greater than 15 million? I'm trying to figure out, what is that number?
I think one of the questions is, if you look at what we plan to do, we've got what we planned. This is our capacity to go forward. And until this council gets a recommendation from the manager, I don't know that you can tell people what we're doing until this council gets a recommendation and we approve it. I think it's tough.
I would
know
agree
it's hard.
with that.
People want us to say, oh, here's the answer. But any one of us can only speak for one, and I can't even speak for that one. So the question is, what you might support is the answer, but what?
Right, that's what I would agree
There is.
with, for us to be on the same page and for it to be clear to the community, because members of council have spoken to community with a number of 50 million. So, one, getting that out of our heads without knowing really what number we're looking at, and saying that as of today, this right here, this 57.3 to 67.3, somewhere in here, we might be able to identify an additional amount. We just don't know what that additional amount is yet.
Until the council approves it, it doesn't happen.
But
I'm sorry, Mr. Phipps was next. and then-
Well, the manager wanted to
Oh, the
respond.
manager, I'm sorry.
So to get to 50, from the 15 that's planned, you would need 35 more. Of that.
from that,
What are you gonna do in 2
Yes.
years? In 2
Mr.
years?
That's what I'm
Phipps.
saying, we just
Well,
need to stop telling.
inasmuch as we can't say definitively what the ask is gonna be, what we're gonna put out there to the community in terms of what the trust fund dollars are, can we definitively say that it won't be 50 million?
Well,
No,
no, you
we
can't
cannot
say,
say that.
as individuals, you can only say what you speak for.
That's right.
And then the council will make a decision, and the vote's not until May.
Right, but I think if that 50 million is already out there to the community, I mean, if they got it, because we say, well, it'll be 20.
The Economic Task
Right.
Force opportunity said lead up to. They never said 50, they said up to. So I think that the community made an ask in that report. That's without saying, that's what they said, up to. Mr. Winston?
this is where I think people get frustrated with this is a pretty easy question to answer to me. I mean, can we responsibly take care of our financial fiduciary responsibilities for the entirety of the city at this point in time, and significantly do we believe we'll be able to significantly or at all increase our bond package for the Housing Trust Fund in a significant manner? That it seems like a yes or no question
But it's not.
to me.
It is a yes or no question until for the council to answer as its entirety.
Yeah, I don't think we're asking for the specific number right here, but where are we trending towards? We've been dealing with all these different types of models, what we don't know, but, there's a lot we don't know until we know it, but where are we trending towards? Are we going to be able to increase it by $1, by none? Is it going to be significantly more than that?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Mr.
There's
Driggs?
one more step in this process, okay? I think we have asked the manager to look at some of these CIP events and look at other things. So we would appreciate back from you your thoughts on what the balance is in terms of our future needs and our current availability, and therefore, in particular, what you think we could responsibly do, and then we can react to that. Right now, all we're looking at is that pot of money, and we're not quite sure what it means. So I do think before we can have a really good conversation, we need a little more from you in terms of what our choices are. That's been my feeling. We just don't know. I mean, for example, if you look out to 2022, what does it do if we do this? If we take a couple of projects off the CIP, where are we? It's all part of a system, and we have to solve the whole system.
Okay, so I don't think that we have time, it's 4:29. I don't think we have time for aviation or the general fund update.
1 minute, Mayor.
So that means,
So we will adjourn to this session.
Madam Mayor, since the request has been made to be able to look at some stuff before we tackle it, since I presume that the aviation slides are printed and ready to be given to us, can we have them to look at before we reconvene?
The other slides ready, the deck ready?
Yes.
Yes, we'll pass those out, and we'll schedule that, and if you want to give us the revenue and expenditure forecast,
Phil can do that in about 1 minute.
all right, can you stay for 1 minute for the general fund?
Anything for you, Mayor.
Oh, you're right, yeah, I believe that. All right, so let's go, Phil.
Just a quick update on the general fund.
Yeah, it's probably the same.
So the departments and the budget staff have been working really hard to continue to look at revenue trends, to look at expenditures, and really scrub through thousands of line items of budgets. And on February 21st, at our workshop, I reported that there was a $6.1 million difference between our base revenues and our base expenditures. Understand that that base condition only represents the resources needed to continue current service levels. They don't include pay increases for employees. So the $9.4 million.
I don't think everybody's hearing because we're getting hole punching our notebooks, and so, yes.
Where are those numbers? Is it in here somewhere?
No, he's just
I'm
talking.
going to give you a verbal update.
So,
Madam Mayor,
let's,
can I clarify what he just said?
Yes.
Did you just say that what we saw on that slide, that was a 1.5% market adjustment and a 3% merit increase, is not included in the numbers you just said?
It is not, it was not
you'll
included
say
in.
those numbers again,
Let me do
Phil,
it again.
and say not included. That will get us all on the same page.
So Phil,
Why would that not be included?
do your thing, but I want to
All right.
start off by saying that, so going back to the retreat, we've been in a hole since January. So all of the discussions about salary increases for police or anything that we're doing on the operating side, Phil's not even at zero yet. So at some point, we have to get to zero, where revenue is matching expenditures. Then we'll start talking about what's the salary increase worth altogether? The 9.4 million and all the other things we've been talking about. Same concept when we start to talk about the CIP. Two different, CIP is like an American Express, right? We're going to be able to do some things, and then we're going to pay, that's bad. It's like a mortgage, okay?
No, it's
So the credit
because
card-
you have to pay on
Yeah,
time
right.
and no interest,
Right, so there's a credit card that we have, right?
Yes.
And while there is a maximum that we can have, you don't get there, right? Right? You pay what you can afford on a monthly basis. So when we start to talk about the housing trust fund and the streets and sidewalks and neighborhoods and transportation, we're for the most part borrowing money and paying that over a 20-year period. When we start talking about salaries, that's operational, and the money has to come in that year to make that payment. So we need to get to zero and then start fulfilling some of the requests. I'm sorry, Phil, go ahead.
So let me restate the number real quick. Let me just get to the point. On February 21st, I reported we had a $6.1 million gap, $6.1 million before we get to zero.
I have a question.
Yes?
Thank you very much. 6.1 million positive variance. No, negative variance. Wow.
Negative.
Gap.
Gap.
Gap. Yes.
As of today, as a result of a lot of work by a lot of people, we've closed that $6.1 million gap to approximately $2 million gap.
Nice. Good job.
So we're closer, but
So
we're not there
that
yet.
critical look, Phil is responsible for.
Way to go, Phil.
Get one attaboy out of us today.
We're not there yet. We're continuing to work. This is a fluid process. We continue to scrub. We continue to look at revenues. We continue to look at the spending trends and the collection rates. And as we move through the process, things will change. Things always change until we get to a point where the manager makes a recommendation.
Okay, Mr. Driggs.
Just to clarify, though, we are looking for 2 million plus any amount that we decide for salary increases. So in the base case, the illustration that we saw, that was 9 million. So that means that we're trying to fill a gap of 11 million if we want to go there on the salary increases, and without respect to any other choices we may make, because this is just doing the same thing this year that we did last year budget so far.
Exactly, that's correct.
Okay, Mr. Bakari.
Would you do us, as best as possible, a favor to, I think there's going to be a budgeting business as usual approach, which is find little things here and there, and, you know, within a very large budget to see how we get back to zero, and then how we account for 1.5% and 3%, things like that. Would you also look at a scenario of big ideas? And, you know, this won't be the most positive or great marketable exercise, but if you can look at, if we are going to make some big idea shifts, if we are going to look at public safety and our first responders a little differently, and we're going to do something different there without raising taxes, what else can we look at to do a big idea of where we should and shouldn't be playing as it relates to government services? And some examples would be, we've made some drastic decisions around C projects for stormwater. Should we be in the business of B projects? We have 311, right? Great transformational idea years ago with chat bots and AI and where the world is going. Is that where we're heading? So those are just bad examples off the top of my head. But if you can find, not for, and you may say, I don't recommend this, but some big ideas that might allow us to reprioritize the existing money to different places.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Ms.
Thank you.
Ashmore.
So just to clarify, that's a different fund, stormwater. I know that's an example, that's a bad example. Because stormwater is a separate enterprise fund, it has nothing to do with this fund. So I would suggest that you use different example for that, and not stormwater
That
fund.
was illustrative. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Okay. All right, thank you guys for a good session, really appreciate it.
We got challenges.
I know.